I tried the grapefruit version of it. It was a little bitter, but after you get used to it, it's pretty good because I like the sparkle. I think I checked it.
Just waiting on you, Mr.
I
Superintendent.
guess I didn't tell you I won the lottery. I just came here for
Story of my life.
Good morning. The board workshop for May 10th, 2016 is now in session. Pam, roll call, please.
Mr. Craig?
Present.
Mrs. Belford?
Present.
Mr. Ziegler?
Present.
Mrs. Henderson?
Here.
Mrs. Nisi?
Here.
Michelle Irwin, Director of Community Relations, will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please stand.
This workshop has been called for staff to present the board with oversight of strategic plan draft as well as provide opportunity for public discussion among board members. At this time, I'll turn the meeting over to Dr. Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Ziegler. Can we all hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. As I was checking my personal, professional notes and files, I think that my interaction with Brevard Public Schools started almost about a year ago with the application of a superintendent opening. And so through that search process, through my preparation, the public interviews, private interviews, comments from internal, external stakeholders, upon being fortunately blessed with the opportunity of becoming the superintendent, one of the first things I did was present the board with an entry plan, a draft entry plan. That draft plan received some comments, questions, suggestions. It was finalized, and then it was turned back over to the board, and that really became the platform for me to operate as superintendent.
It's a clicker.
I thought I was in school again, you know?
Is he your trigger man over there?
He is. He's a trigger man. Slow but effective. He gets there. He's good. We're good. One of the most central themes that I encountered was this piece on employee morale very early on, and employee morale being impacted by several pieces, some of them local, but some of them external to the district. And I'll just briefly go over what some of those pieces were. One, the fiscal constraints that really all school districts in the state of Florida have been forced to wrestle with over the last 3 to 5 years, with not being able to maintain salary, benefits, work environments like we want to, an aggressive shift to new state standards, an accountability and overassessment of children that's created a lot of noise, and then also the increase of diversity in terms of our student population, cultural and economic diversity on the rise, and all working together to help to impact employee morale. So one of the goals of that entry plan was, there were several pieces of that goal. One, to establish a really good working relationship with the 5 individuals that blessed me with this opportunity, the board, to extend that to the surrounding community, all stakeholders, to assess, prior to doing anything, all of the strengths, all of the weaknesses of Brevard, and then to look at the opportunity of leveraging the network, the relationships being created, as well as some early wins, in order to use relationships and early wins to create a foundation of momentum and drive the system forward. And so some of the early wins, I'll just recap for us all: an immediate focus on relationships and morale from our employees, working with the board and the superintendents across the state to implement a complete vote of no confidence on our accountability system, and then looking inward and eliminating 192 district assessments that were overburdening our community, and then also working with the board and our labor groups in order to implement the highest pay raise that employees have received in about 5 or more years. And of course, listening and learning being the priority. The outcome of all that listening and learning would be a review of what current strategic priorities exist, a summary of what was heard, what was felt, making sure that data points could either confirm or refute what was being heard, and then identifying gaps, areas that we want to grow, areas that we want to build on, and that would create the new strategic plan for the organization. One of the things that I heard loud and clear, and what was backed up by a very objective review of information and data, was the strength of the people here in Brevard. The greatest strength, in my humble opinion, of this school system is its people. And as you know, we examined everything, people, process, policy, and hands down, bar none, people are our absolute strength here in the district. But in that, something also that impacts employee morale is this whole notion of employee silos, and sometimes employees, while they're working really, really hard, aren't always brought to the table for a big decision, and we're not always collaborating like we should. And so we want to predetermine all roles and responsibilities prior to taking on any major projects. And then also we want to make sure that the operations of this district, we get to a point where we absolutely function like a very well-oiled machine. And looking at the graphic on this slide, beginning with clear and concise direction from our board to the superintendent, engaging and collaborating with senior staff, the superintendent, and the board, and then working with the rest of the system to make sure that we not only meet the board and the community's expectation, but we exceed all expectations. And these themes from the listening and learning and data analysis were created, as I mentioned earlier, after a very, very robust engagement tour with the community. We presented these themes, these draft themes, to a pretty sizable audience here on December 15th. And in addition to that audience that appeared pretty supportive, we went through and did a survey online, and it received overwhelming support. 500 plus people completed the survey, and over 90% of them agree, or strongly agree, that this is the direction we should be moving into. And so that was December 15th, and after December 15th, we came back, started working more on the themes, and individual board members took on championship roles for each one of the themes. And we're doing this to make sure, one, we have the right vision, and that the vision is actually executed. And one of the things that I take pretty personal within my professional role is to dispel the myth that an elected board can do or should do no more than policy or budget. I absolutely believe that, as I look around the room, I'm looking at the governance team, the leadership team of the organization, various roles, an elected board, an appointed superintendent, senior staff members, but there's absolutely no reason at all that we all can't work together to get this stuff done. So dispelling that myth, I think, is important. Board members, you have your ears to the pavement, you're elected by the community, and you have experiences and backgrounds that are extremely valuable to helping us move this district forward. So by way of this strategic plan, not only do I assume or assert that we can all work together, but this is going to provide the foundation, and we're actually going to make this happen, our close proximity partnership. So to recap what those 6 themes were or are, we have leading and learning, in no particular order: leading and learning, employee excellence, facilities and capital allocations, our governance team, finance, and community relations. Back to December 15th, right after that presentation, I think we all went and had a well-deserved, well-needed winter holiday. I know I needed it. I tried to get some of my hair to grow back, but that didn't work. But we came back in January, and we got to work with taking the 6 themes and turning them into a little over 20 objective profiles within those 6 themes. We worked on that through the months of January and February, and then on March 18th, as the board may recall, all 20-plus objective profiles in draft form were shared with the board. All board members gave very specific, very well-received feedback, criticism, etc. And then board champions had an opportunity to meet for a longer period of time with the objective leads, the lead senior staff person for each theme, to really get even deeper into the details of their respective championship theme and provide additional feedback. All of that was compiled or has been compiled into the edits that you received, the board received last week, and that we will be discussing here today. So definitely ready to have a very collaborative public conversation around these strategic initiatives. For the board's sake and the listening audience, each objective you will hear several very common themes from each objective. You'll hear an overall summary of the objective. You'll hear how that objective connects back to the December 15th conversation. You'll also hear what, if any, major changes within the objective have been made since March 18. And then you'll hear a highlight of perhaps 1 or 2 strategic strategies within each objective profile. I know we have 3 hours scheduled. The senior staff and I, basically because we know the board has seen this a lot, right? So we're prepared to go through maybe a 40 to 50 minute overview of all of the objective profiles, leaving ample time for the board to engage in conversation and or ask follow-up questions, critique, et cetera, et cetera. So board chairman, if that's okay with you, we'll get started. Go ahead. And leading us off with our first objective profile will be Dr. Reinhardt.
Thank you, Dr. Blackburn. Good morning, everyone. We're starting this morning with the theme of leading and learning, and our first objective profile was on protecting instructional time. And I think one of the things that we heard loud and clearly when Dr. Blackburn was doing his listening tour was that many of our stakeholders were concerned about protecting the instructional time. So really staying to the heart, the mission, the vision of what schools are about, and that's having enough instructional time, eliminating barriers to teachers being able to teach, to plan together, the things that are really at the heart of our mission. And so that really is where this first profile comes from, is that we want to make sure that we protect instructional time, eliminate barriers that might be preventing teachers from teaching, and identifying changes that need to occur within our system to ensure that these things happen, that we're communicating them clearly. And so we recognize that every school has different needs and might be experiencing some different barriers to that. So the first thing we want to do is to have our principals and our teacher leaders form sort of task force at their school and look at what the needs are at each individual school and what are the things that they feel like are impacting instructional time. They'll be identifying barriers, and then they'll be working towards making recommendations to all of us, to the system, so that we can clearly communicate and help prevent those items from impacting instructional time. We want to make sure that we communicate clearly to everyone in the system that this is a high priority, that we must keep up the instructional time as our top priority, and that nothing impacts that from a system perspective. And so you're going to hear later on with one of Dr. Mullen's objective profiles that we're really working to integrate this with the operations side of the system and making sure that any new initiatives, anything that we're pushing out to the schools, that we have clearly thought about that and the impact on instructional time to make sure that we're protecting what's important, the teaching and the learning in the classroom.
Okay, I'm up next. Good morning. To go along with what Laura just said about leading and learning, we know and we heard on December 15th, one of the struggles is teacher morale. And by supporting educator effectiveness and building the capacity of our teachers, our goal is to improve teacher morale, improve teacher retention, and to close the achievement gap. We all are very proud and recognize that Brevard Public Schools is a high-performing district, but we also realize the work we need to do to close the achievement gaps. By supporting educator effectiveness and building the capacity of our teachers, we'll improve student achievement and help to prepare our students to enter the workforce and/or post-secondary education. Our focus on providing professional development, on prioritizing our standards, learning skills, and student tasks will support teachers in delivery of standard-based instruction. The establishment of a district framework for conducting instructional reviews will help us, as Laura just said. We know every school is different. We can't go to the same approach in every school. So by doing instructional reviews and having that mechanism to go out and see what the needs are at each individual school, then we can help guide the professional development to meet the needs of those teachers and the school. In turn, our goal is that by providing the support to our teachers, providing the training and anything else they need to be effective in the classroom, student achievement will increase and our teachers will be felt supported and teacher morale will improve.
Good morning, everyone. So the Office of Schools Choice is transition into the Office of Equity, Innovation, and Choice, and increasing our equitable distribution of and expansion of the access to academic programs. We're very excited about the potential for program expansion. BPS has many great educational opportunities to offer its students in way of choice. We can, however, only continue to enhance the offerings, thereby readying our students for career and post-secondary opportunities. And those are the things we want to look upon. So one of our first strategies will obviously be to research and analyze the program landscape that we have. We have history, folklore, and legend as to how things are placed in various parts of the district. And so we know that every one of our students can benefit from these opportunities of choice and want to give them those opportunities, repetitious word. We also need to look at how will we fund these. We can't deny that all of these things will do cost funding, so whether it's grants, capital, or curriculum, that those are also one of the techniques that we have to look into. And one of the other strategies that we will need to look at is to conduct a feasibility study to address potential transportation solutions. We know that there are students who need assistance in this avenue in order to access the wonderful programs that we do have to offer. So a large task that I envision will take anywhere from 3 to 5 years to make occur, but some really exciting opportunities in the form of program expansion.
Good morning, everyone. As you know, during Dr. Blackburn's first few months in his tenure at BPS, he received a lot of stakeholder feedback, both internal and external. And some of it was related to the social and emotional well-being of our students and making sure that we understand that it's not only paramount to a student's success, it's also critical for us to address it in a more deliberate fashion. We all know that teachers want and need to have the ability to teach in their classrooms, and they need to be able to teach in classrooms where students are engaged and ready to learn. And so the social-emotional objective dovetails with what you just heard from Jane and Laura regarding providing teachers with the strategies and the supports that they need to make sure that they can address their curriculum with their students in a supportive environment for our students. And we have a supportive environment, but we want to be more deliberate in providing teachers the supports that they need. As you know, each school environment is different, and so part of our strategy will be to kick off the start of the new school year with a staff symposium for principals, assistant principals, and teacher leaders, where they will hear from a keynote speaker, followed by breakout sessions to talk about different aspects of social emotional health, followed by a closing speaker, who is one of our graduates from BPS, and she will outline what it was like for her to go through our system, the supports that she needed, that she wished she had, the supports that she did have that made her successful. Her story is very compelling, and I think it will set a wonderful stage for our principals and teacher leaders and assistant principals moving into the new school year. The second area that fits nicely with all of the leading and learning that you've heard from already has to do with creating a system-wide approach to discipline. This is another area that Dr. Blackburn outlined on December 15th, that he received much internal and external feedback regarding inconsistencies in student discipline from school to school, area to area, level to level. And one of the strategies, the purpose of developing and implementing a system-wide approach to student discipline is to ensure that all students have equal opportunities and to ensure that all teachers have the support they need and administrators have the support they need to provide students with consequences that are not random. In as much as possible, aligning those consequences to the infraction that the student commits and making sure that those are consistent from school to school and area to area. The reason that I feel this is so important, and it dovetails with everything you've heard so far, is teachers have to be able to teach in an environment that students can learn, and we've got to be able to provide that. So working through a discipline matrix that allows the administrators to look at disciplinary infractions and incidents and actions that they take in a more methodical way will improve our ability to have classrooms that are free from disruption so teachers can teach. And I think giving teachers the support that they need and giving them the tools that they need and working through different disciplinary consequences that keep kids in school, but in school engaged, is important for our district in order for us to make progress with our leading and learning.
Can we pause after each one of these and comment as opposed to at the end have to jump around?
Any way that you want to do it.
I mean, that would be my preference, otherwise we're going to be jumping around. I mean, I guess I'd like to pause now at the end of this one and make some comments, and then before we go on to the next one. But
That's going to, we can do it that way. That'll change the format from them doing their presentation and then having an hour or two of conversation.
if we do a presentation, then I don't feel we have meaningful feedback, and it becomes a dog and pony show.
What do you all want to do? You want to comment along the way, or wait till they're done and then start digging in from the beginning?
I'm fine either way. I would suggest if we go ahead and allow staff to report out, then perhaps we can be a little more organized in our questions after they have reported out. So we'll address any concerns we have on leading and learning in our discussion portion, and then move, as we go through, so that we're not all over the place. But I do understand that we probably want to make sure that we hear all of the information from them so that we can then go back and ask questions.
That's what I was thinking. I was making my notes as we go along. And
Okay, I just want to make sure that it's concise then, because
let's continue.
As long as
We'll
it's
take our
concise,
notes, and then we'll start back at the beginning, I guess.
okay, and then we'll do each section for questions then?
Sure, yes.
Thank you.
And we'll practice efficiency in our conversation to make sure the board has ample time for conversation. And now that brings us to employee excellence.
All right, back to me again. So we're starting in our next theme of employee excellence, and you'll see that the first objective profile is in regards to building the capacity of our principals. The research shows that the teacher in the classroom has the highest impact on student learning, but the research also shows that the second highest impact on student learning is really our principals, our instructional leaders at the schools. And so that's why we feel like this is such an important topic. We want to expand the capacity of all of our principals. It's very important that we have a balance between the management and operations side of being a principal and running a school, along with the instructional leadership side of the house for the principals. So we want to identify the needs and the support that each school has, and we recognize that every principal is different and brings with them different strengths and different areas for growth. So we're going to differentiate our support and our training for principals based upon needs and also based upon their wants and their desires and survey results and things that they get like from the Insight survey. So areas of concern, we feel like the most effective way, we want to try to bring principals together in small groups around a problem of practice, something that either they're really interested in, an area that we feel like we need to strengthen or enhance for them. Essentially what we're creating are principal PLCs. We want them to be able to come together and study together and learn together in a learning community. We also know that another very important aspect of this is our coaching and mentoring of principals. We have a strong program, and we are enhancing that, and we want to continue to make that stronger with a national mentorship program. We also are going to see that there are very strong ties with this objective profile with our HR department. We want to make sure that we are also strengthening our pipeline so that we're helping teacher leaders if they want to become administrators and administrators who want to continue into district leadership roles, that we want to strengthen that pipeline all the way through to help prepare them for those roles and to be ready, obviously, for the future, whatever those openings might be.
Good morning. I have the second component of employee excellence, and this speaks to an audit and improvement of the employment cycle from the recruit to hire process, which also includes an enhancement on our onboarding initiative. In December, there was much discussion around employee engagement to ensure our employees want to enjoy their work, find meaning in it, be recognized when they do well, and feel a sense of achievement. Engagement is about connecting your head and your heart to your work. And it's vital as our employees, as you've heard today, are our greatest assets. After looking at this initiative 6 weeks ago, and for the last 6 weeks, I have reviewed several strategies with regard to our push for a diverse workforce. I felt it was important for us to examine the concept of diversity and how a diverse workforce will impact our students' performance. We are charged as a school system to meet the diverse needs of all of our children, not just some. Therefore, it is important that we have a plan to capture our talent, our diverse talent. But diversity looks at diverse backgrounds, diverse professional experiences, a diversity of thought. It also looks at race and ethnicity. A workforce consisting of all this diversity will be well placed to understand and meet the needs of our entire student population. HR must be very strategic and purposeful with how we recruit the best and brightest talent for BPS. There is research out there that indicates that the majority of people work within 40 miles of where they grew up. So it's important that we partner with our local organizations to help us tap into the resources located here in this community, including all 17 municipalities, our housing authorities, and various minority and pastoral groups, so that they can spread the word and partner with us that BPS is their first choice for employment in Brevard County. Also, HR should be charged with, and will be charged with, that once we capture this talent, we must plug them in immediately. Having a robust onboarding program is key to engaging a workforce from day one, by teaching everyone what it means to be part of Team Brevard and how to fit into our vision and mission of serving every child to the best they can be. The third component speaks to the next step in the employment cycle. It is about capacity and building it within our workforce. In December, there was discussion again about employee engagement and satisfaction and about personal excellence, and about our employees being our greatest ambassadors. A high-performing, engaged workforce is the single greatest recruitment strategy for any organization. People are naturally drawn to work for an organization that has employees who are enthusiastic about where they work, and this happens when our people feel valued and are recognized for their great work. Again, I looked at some changes. I felt that we needed to set up a schedule to begin to do systematic audit of our job descriptions to ensure that each of our employees understands their job responsibilities. This will ensure clarity around job performance and boost confidence in our workforce that we are all clear about what needs to be done and who reports to whom. People naturally want to be successful, so it is important that they know upfront what our expectations are in order that they can be. Our employees also need opportunities to grow professionally and avenues, if they choose, for promotion. This includes both the instructional and the operational side of our house. We will only perform at the highest level that our workforce is developed. This plan addresses the need to develop high-quality professional development, opportunities to promote our talent, and most importantly, a system for recognizing our workforce for their outstanding efforts and successes. Our children are depending on them to be high-functioning, highly engaged, and highly satisfied. We are also working on a strategy to continue to expand opportunities to give all of our employees a voice by building open forums for them to share their concerns and also their ideas about how we can move this district forward. Communication that flows up and down the chain of command will be a priority. The workforce must be trusted as professionals we hired them to be to make suggestions and changes they know are in the best interest of our mission, and then know how and who to share their ideas with in order to better the whole population. Great ideas and best practices should never be a secret or isolated to one work location. The people, again, are our greatest asset and our largest resource for reform and innovation. This component is a strategic objective to ensure our workforce is captured early in the hiring season. This is a metric I have much experience with. I have in the past monitored my recruitment efforts in a large school district and have compared evaluation scores from those that we've captured in February as compared to those that we have captured in August. And invariably, every year, those that were performing at the highest level were those that we captured early in our recruitment season. This objective is about HR working closely with finance department to ensure we are staffing schools according to their program needs, which are driven by the unique needs of the students who will attend each school. This is where HR can speak to equity. For example, when you look at a Title I school versus a non-Title I school, each school has needs, and we must be prepared to meet those by optimizing our staff and our human resources. HR can assist in making our playing fields more level by giving early preference to harder staffed schools, by considering experience as a qualifier to work with our most struggling students. Those are opportunities for equity through an HR lens. This is also about examining program placement around the district and working closely with all stakeholders, including the principal, associate superintendents, curriculum, transportation, food service, exceptional education, finance, and the community to provide the human resources necessary to ensure every school opens on equal footing. Finally, this component addresses union relations and compensation. In December, there was discussion in regard to ensuring our employee salaries and benefits were at optimal levels in order to attract the best and brightest to Brevard for a quality workforce. The job market is becoming more competitive. Just as children and parents have greater choice in their pathway for an education, these choices are also provided to our potential and existing workforce. We are competing with private, virtual, parochial, charter, and homeschooling options for our employees. These strategies in this objective address a need to examine the compensation and benefit packages of our contiguous districts in order that we stand out as the #1 choice. We also need to do a compensation review of industry standards for some of our tougher to fill positions. We will continue to partner with our bargaining teams to gain a clear understanding of the needs of our staff and teachers to ensure we're optimizing our resources to create a healthy work environment that enhances engagement and, again, satisfaction. We need to maximize our monies in order that we can compensate all of our employees at a competitive rate and that our benefit costs are in line with our competitors. And we need to work with vendors to ensure we're maximizing all options for our workforce to be proactive with their health. We need to be incentivizing those who choose a healthy lifestyle, and we need to work on a convenience of care with the internal health clinics. We need our workforce to be healthy and happy in order that they are here at work each day, providing a top-notch education to the children of Brevard.
Good morning. Good morning, without the echo.
Good morning.
Good morning. This is, excuse me, this is our third theme. It is facilities and capital allocation. There's a commonality among the three objectives within this theme. So I'm going to take a second and just give you an overview of those three, and then before I start to talk about each of them individually. Facilities and capital allocation. Facilities is a part of it, but capital allocation is the main theme here, because there are many components that capital has to be allocated to. Facilities being a large part, but not necessarily all of it. So Objective 3A talks about equitable allocation for support functions for the educational mission. Objective 3C talks about allocation of capital or resources for programs, which are Ms. Klein, Dr. Reinhardt, and Ms. Archer, and capacity in terms of adequate capacity for our students and appropriate capacity, meaning the types of facilities that we offer. Objective 3B talks about the funding for those two objectives. 3A is about allocation of capital for support. 3C is allocation of capital for programs and facilities. And 3B is how do we get that funding or ensure adequate funding for those allocations. So what you're going to see as we walk through these three objectives are common words. Stakeholders, meaning who's involved in that process, who provides input. Equitable. What is equitable? How do we establish what equality is and how do we ensure that equitable distribution? And long-range plan. You'll see in each of those objectives that there's a need for a long-range plan to establish a continuing sustainable allocation to support all of those functions. Objective 3A, focus on equitable allocation of capital resources for all support functions. What are those support functions? Well, the first thing that comes off is debt. Our CFO is insistent that we pay our debt first, which is a good thing. But more importantly, after we do pay our debt, how do we allocate those resources to support those functions that support the educational mission? Those functions are facilities, technology, transportation, warehouse, security, and indirectly the schools and communities. As you know, we have school-initiated projects. The community has some input into this and would like to see some allocation of capital funding. So, and that was apparent in Dr. Blackburn's Listening and Learning tour. How do we accommodate that? Well, under the sense that we have stakeholders, you can see here that I've advocated establishing a capital advisory committee, and we can talk about that later during discussion. But that is an aggregation of the both internal and external stakeholders that would be a part of that decision-making process, and they are also the beneficiaries of that allocation. establish a method of prioritized equitable allocation. There isn't going to be enough to give everyone what they want, so a methodology to establish prioritization is going to have to be established. And you can see, as I've said, there's a long-range capital planning component to that. Gino? Would you skip to 3C, please? Yes, okay. So I'm going to go to the other end on the allocation side. Objective 3C talks about establish capital allocation practices to expand programs and manage student growth or decline. Well, the programs are exactly what the learning and program advocates talked about. How do we expand programs? How do we equitably distribute those programs? How do we establish capital to support what we want to deliver as an educational mission? The other side of that, that is our mission. That is what we do here, and that obviously has to be prioritized. The other side to that is, how do we deliver appropriate learning environments in terms of the physical part of that? Or do we have appropriate science laboratories, as a for instance? Do we have equitable core spaces? We did an equity study, and the newer schools have X amount of square feet for the core spaces, such as media, such as music. There are schools out there with less than half of what we put in the new schools. That's equity. You might be able to get by with it, but if you want to look at equity, that's something we should be looking at. So appropriate spaces, that certainly comes into play when you talk about some programs like CTE. Those are very expensive, very specific types of spaces that need to be appropriate to deliver that mission effectively. And then adequate. We have to have enough capacity to service our students. We do planning to project where we will need capacity, and what we need to do is study how we're going to deliver, how we most effectively deliver that capacity. Again, you'll see in there that there's engaged stakeholders. That means certainly external stakeholders in that process. And again, you'll see at the bottom a development of a long-range funding plan to allow that to happen. And Gino, if you would go back to 3C2. This was changed. The initial objective said ensure sustainability of local capital funding sources. As we received feedback or input from the board members on that particular objective, and followed by discussion with our champion, Mr. Craig, it became apparent that we had short-circuited that strategy, or the development of that strategy. We had assumed that we had a need, and we had assumed that the funding of that need depended on local funding sources. So I've changed that to expand the objective to incorporate a validation of the need and a look at all potential funding sources to service that need. So now the objective says ensure adequate and appropriate funding sources for capital requirements. And you'll see that what we're doing here is basically communicate the use of existing capital funds up there. And what that means is that we do have existing sources of capital funding, both from the state and local in the sense that we receive impact fees and we receive sales tax. It's our mission to effectively and efficiently and appropriately use those funds. And I believe that we're doing that. But more importantly, as we go forward here, what our mission will be for this objective is to verify that we have capital requirements coming up to service those programs and capital needs, the capacity needs. We'll analyze all potential funding sources. We may or may not choose as an organization to pursue the current local funding sources. We may choose to enhance them, change them, go after other ones. So that is essentially what we're doing here, and you can see that stakeholders, those three common words, will obviously have to have a long-term plan to do that, but you'll see here stakeholders, representatives in this case of the community and local governments. And that is that third theme.
Good morning. I'll be introducing the fourth theme of governance. And it may appear that although it's not explicitly reflective or connected to teaching and learning, really the ultimate goal through governance is to protect, reinforce, and support our core mission of teaching and learning. By ultimately connecting the compelling why of our work, student learning, to the what, or the activities that we engage in every day, with, through this theme, the collective commitment of how we agree to work and engage system-wide. And that's defined in the first objective as ensuring schools receive timely and effective support from our central office. Ultimately, through providing high-quality service and highly effective internal communication that is structured around cross-functional processes. You'll see that the strategies include, first, defining and establishing protocols of communication, both horizontally across the organization and vertically. What I mean by horizontally is we have 9 divisions across the organizations that ultimately are very interdependent on each other to function efficiently, effectively for the service and support of our students, as we have as many employees that provide direct support, not necessarily in the classroom, to help our schools be effective and efficient. And then vertical communication throughout our organization that'll guide the way of our work and communicating from every level of the organization so that we are right hand and left hand knows what's going on throughout the organization. You might recall in Dr. Blackburn's December 15th presentation, the graphic where we had lots of functions and activities going on across the district that seemed to be disjointed and disconnected. And this objective profile strives to bring us together to work very cohesively and interdependently. Other strategy includes not just communication, but then also how do we begin or how do we continue to build a culture by which we commit to customer service and we all become connected to the ultimate measure of success, which is that of our students. So whether you're providing a labor service to schools or you're in the classroom as an instructional assistant, how do we build that culture of customer service mindedness and supporting our schools to ultimately bring around student success? And then finally, strategies in this objective profile include the regular progress monitoring of those protocols, of that culture building, as well as annual and semi-annual assessment of the effectiveness and how we're doing, so that we, across our entire organization, can live up to our commitment to continuous improvement.
And I have the second component of this theme. This objective speaks to the governance between the board, the superintendent, and the senior staff. In December, the superintendent addressed the need to organize and define rules of engagement for the board, superintendent, and senior staff. He also spoke to defining procedures to create or change policy and define how we work together to execute the mission of the district. This objective is about building a foundation of trust that is driven by open communication between all 3 areas. It is important to establish protocols for board meetings and work sessions with as much advance notice for the preparation of the board agenda. Optimizing our resource of time is key in the objective to ensure the board is well prepared to review agenda items and ask questions of the superintendent and the senior staff, so that they would have time to provide accurate and timely responses. We will also be charged to review the role of advisory councils and our internal processes to bring recommendations to the board that include a summary of all considerations. All this is to ensure the board, the superintendent, and all of our constituents are well informed about the progress being made toward the education of our students here in Brevard.
Good morning. Our district, as well as many other districts, have experienced several lean years that have required us to make a number of budget cuts. These budget cuts have had a significant impact on staffing, programs, and departmental budgets. As we learned in December, some cuts have negatively impacted our employees with increased workloads and unpleasant work environments. We need to re-examine these cost-saving strategies that have been put in place over the last 5 to 6 years and determine if they're still applicable in meeting our current strategic plan. In addition, we need to be 100% cost efficient and assure that we are expensing funds to the priorities of our strategic plan. In order to address this, we will be conducting efficiency studies of organization-wide functions, seeking improvements that will provide cost savings opportunities. Lastly, we will be looking to our sister districts for revenue-generating ideas and bring all viable alternatives to both senior staff and the board for review. One consistent theme we heard in December is the need for transparency as well as funding priorities appropriately. As a result, we need to understand and report real-time revenues and expenditures in a transparent manner. In addition, we need to be looking towards future projections and our operating needs, trying to identify the impacts of possible revenue projections being based on being flat, increased, and decreased in the future years. This will give us an opportunity to consider actions we may need to take to fund our priorities appropriately. We will also gain an understanding in regards to underutilized funds and protecting district assets. We will be developing financial reporting that will better monitor and analyze our district funds, as well as improving processes to safeguard district assets. These changes, as a result of this, you will see some significant changes in the strategies developed for this objective. These changes include the development of a new financial reporting and analysis function, the development of a revenue and expenditure forecasting tool to assist us in planning for our future needs, and a debt repayment matrix that will indicate opportunities to consider options to reduce our debt payments.
Good morning. I believe it was at our last workshop or board meeting where Ms. Nisi brought up the fact that communications are so vital. And you will see, if you haven't noticed, I think you have, that community relations, quality communications, and proactive communications are embedded throughout the strategic plan. So I appreciate you bringing that to our attention. And you'll see later that I've added a strategy that really addresses that as well. Because we're demonstrating success in building our community partnerships in many sectors of our community, this objective on strengthening and growing our community partnerships is designed to grow what we currently have in place and expand these partnerships to include a concerted effort on local and state legislative delegation, as well as government officials, as well as government liaisons from various corporations in Brevard County. By focusing our efforts in this manner, we can leverage opportunities with our partners to positively influence teaching and learning. In December, the initial findings indicated that the district and community would benefit from these active relationships, and you will see the close alignment between the need, objective, and the strategies. Our activities will be focused in 3 ways. First, we will strengthen what we already have in place. We'll focus new efforts to grow identified gaps, specifically in the area of local government relations, and develop relationships in a manner that results in our business and community partnerships becoming our frontline team, becoming our voice out in the community, and with their
with delegation members and other legislators. The result will be greater support from our business and community partnerships, local government officials, and government affair liaisons, as well as our state legislators. Dr. Mullins referenced in G1, ensure schools get timely and effective support from central office, the need to work on our communications and make them as effective and efficient as possible. Going back to our December presentation, we have references to the need for central office administration to effectively execute the mission of the district and the need for communications that are balanced and consistent with our embedded processes. If we develop a systematic approach to handling concerns throughout the district, then customer satisfaction should increase, while senior administrators' time can be repurposed or refocused on teaching and learning. Through tracking and monitoring processes, we can support our school and community better by identifying trends, data that will be most beneficial in our continuous improvement efforts. This system should also decrease the level of redundancy that often takes place. We're all aware of those emails that go out to every single person, and then every single person starts working on them. By centralizing it, it starts with one area that then pushes that information out to the person that's best equipped to handle that. And so our goal will be to improve our response to our constituent concerns with clear roles and responsibilities for customer service. Positive communications is critical in community support. Society has changed, and we no longer depend on the formal news outlets to get our communication efforts out to our community. Matter of fact, there's research that says that if you have one person with a strong Twitter following, you can have more impact than a news article can have. No offense to our media out there, but somebody with 60,000 followers can really impact and get your message out much quicker than some of our local media outlets can. So we need to refocus some of our proactive communications efforts. We need targeted messaging to all stakeholder groups. We can no longer just send one type of communication. The days of sending home letters to parents after an incident should be over, and my plan is to have them over. We need to be quicker in our response. Kids are sending out text messages to their parents during incidents. They're posting things on Twitter, and it's causing a great deal of confusion. So we need to really engage that environment and focus our energies that way. We need to create building level brand ambassadors. We can't just focus all of our efforts at the district level. We must evaluate social media protocols and expectations while we continue monitoring new trends to most effectively communicate with our constituent groups. There are different, our senior citizens like paper, our students like Twitter, our parents like Facebook. Our website is there to hold a lot of our information, but we need to drive people to our messaging. We need to attract and retain the highest quality workforce and retain our student population. And Dr. Kent had referenced this in Strategy E5 to hire and recruit the best people to come and work here. The same goes with all of the competitive outlets out there. We need to really focus our efforts to ensure that students and parents make the best choice, and we believe that that's Brevard Public Schools. And so we need to have some concerted efforts to share that information with the community. As identified by our board, all of our major communication efforts identified in the strategic plan should be developed in conjunction with our office. And so if you go to the RACI matrix, while Mr. Theodore has a communications plan embedded in there, he would be the A on that, but obviously our department should be the R, responsible to helping him form that communication strategy. And so we will be working cross-functionally as a team to ensure that those communication efforts are clear, concise, and understandable. If we are successful with our strategies and associated activities, we will increase our ability to communicate to the community, telling our story without reliance on others to do that for us.
The next two, we're nearing the end, by the way. So the next 2 or 3 slides will give an overview on what the work and execution of all of this is going to look like to ensure that that this strategic plan isn't something that sits on a shelf or is just some gorgeous graphics on a website, but actually something that we commit to day in and day out. So there were very deliberate and organized steps used to get us this far, and we have very organized and deliberate steps that we've designed in order to make sure we're actually doing the work over the next year and years to come. So Dr. Mullins and Mrs. Irwin will discuss that portion of it briefly.
So what we presented can be summed up in what you've seen in the red. And there's a lot more white than there is red. So what we've articulated today is the overarching ideas and concepts that we need to work on, but there is a lot of work left to do. So in your binders that you received, this updated binder, you will see a sample project plan. And at this point, after we get past the actual strategic plan, it will be our job as objective team leaders to go and work with focus groups and our staff to develop the actual activities that we will need to have in place in order to achieve our goals in the strategic plan. After project plans are developed, we get into what we call progress monitoring, or what we call routines. What are routines? They're regularly scheduled checkpoints to assess implementation, to make sure everything is on track. They're the engine that drives our implementation. They're a source of structure and discipline. They monitor performance. They diagnose problems, address problems to provide venue to discuss on how can we overcome those challenges. So these routines are meant to help us gauge whether or not we're on track, and if we're not, to develop new strategies or new approaches to ensure that we get back on track. Strong routines have these 4 elements. They occur with regularity, are implemented with strong execution, are focused on performance, and reflect action on performance.
And then another component, and a rather formal component of the progress monitoring process, is what are called stock takes. And those are moments in time where the superintendent sits at the table with different objective profile leads or theme accountability members, and they provide a well-prepared presentation on what has been accomplished within the objective profiles that they are responsible for. Those stock takes are scheduled to happen monthly with different objective leads, and then twice a year there is a organization-wide or entire strategic plan stock take to do assessments. And essentially at those meetings we'll evaluate delivery of specific set objectives and activities, update on progress, give the superintendent an opportunity to push back or hold individuals accountable for progress, reestablish or define immediate areas of urgency, whether those priorities may shift and change since we have such a dynamic system, look at whether or not new policies are needed, ensure that we do meet our commitment to cross-functional departmental work, and then, of course, celebrate milestone completions along the way.
And we're done with our presentation. So, Mr. Ziegler, we can answer questions, or the board can deliberate. We'll take your lead on this.
Can I just ask an overall?
Go ahead.
Okay, at the beginning, Dr. Blackburn, you talked about our goals, that after our challenges, what our goals were, and you talked about the strengths and weaknesses of the district. Could you just briefly tell us what you see as the strengths, just for our listening audience, and our weaknesses, and how this plan, in your opinion, fixes those weaknesses?
So the strengths and weaknesses are, as I see them, very connected to the 6 themes. So if you go, where's Gina? Go back to the 6 themes. I'll run down each one of them and look at strengths and weaknesses there. Very early.
And I'm not looking for a dissertation, just a brief, you know. You can go through them, I just, you know.
Okay. So by far, I mean, if you're looking for brevity, by far our greatest strength is our people, as I said earlier. We are a high-performing school district. Within leading and learning, strengths have been accomplishments, EOC scores, graduation rates, FSA scores, et cetera, et cetera. Challenges have been, and we went through some of this back on December 15th, challenges in that area has been a persistent achievement gap, largely moderated around ethnicity, gender, and student exceptionality. Down in employee excellence, some of the things I originally heard was that, you know, we have employees leaving our school district in droves, and that employee morale was really, really low, and that compensation and benefits were much lower than surrounding districts. Well, in the information you received on December 15th, and I know it's out there online, we were able to confirm and refute several points there. One, as far as salary and benefits are concerned, we're probably mid-range in comparison with surrounding districts, so it's not quite as low as some of the anecdotal conversation would have you believe. However, as was articulated, we want to be number one, so we want to remove any and all doubt around what district, especially here in Central Florida, is the best district to work for. Salary and benefits, employee morale. Again, back on December 15th, we looked at the EDI Insight survey data, which showed, I'm not giving specifics, but approximately 80%, I believe, a little less than 80% of our teachers voiced very positive remarks around their work environment, which left around 20% of the teachers who didn't. So it's not zero, as some of the anecdotes would suggest. 80% is a pretty decent number. The problem with it only being 80% and why employee morale should be a #1 priority is that 20% of our workforce is a sizable number. 20% of teachers is a sizable number. And what we all know from a very practical perspective, unhappy people are a lot more vocal than happy people. And so that drives public trust and confidence in our district. And so that 20% unsatisfied employee has got to get to zero, if not really, really close. So that outlines both a strength and a weakness. Around facilities and capital, you know, several concerns around what protocols are used to decide who gets what, when, and how, okay, was heard. I will tell you, and this comes directly from the group that is charged with selling homes in our communities. Good news, strength, our student achievement sells itself. Bad news, weakness, when people are moving in and purchasing brand new homes, and they have brand new shopping malls, and they have brand new roads and streets and movie theaters, et cetera, et cetera. Our buildings look great, but they are very veteran, very seasoned buildings out there. And so how we decide who gets what, Mr. Theodore mentioned that common core spaces, right? There are issues across the district where we need to tackle that in an equitable way. Governance. So here's an area, the way that the superintendent, the board, and senior staff all work and collaboratively decide on the direction forward, what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, when, timeline, all of that good stuff. I don't think I inherited such an effort, and we want to create that. Finances were articulated back on December 15th as well, and some of my comments here, there's room for disagreement, just like there's room for disagreement on everything else, but what I found as superintendent, as far as finance is concerned, X's and O's tend to be in all the appropriate places. And we have lots and lots of audit reports that substantiate that. What the challenge has been twofold. One, transparency, and two, not only making sure X's and O's are in the right place, but that we're actually leveraging all of our resources, and we are as efficient as possible across the district. We can't provide that assurance right now, and we need to. As I often say, it is very, very difficult in a budget as large as ours to make a small mistake will be very, very significant, and so we need to work on that. Community relations, in short, as I tried as a new superintendent to not recreate any wheels, but just kind of pipe myself into already established relationships, I saw very robust relationships with parent groups, with teacher groups, with business communities, various sectors of the business communities, and even with our military. What I struggled with, to be honest with you, is piping myself into an already established relationship with our local governmental entities, our cities and our county government. And then we all know of the challenges we wrestled with very early on with our relationship with our local delegation and our whole lobbying effort. So strength there seen in relationships we already have established in various sectors of the community, but weakness something to work on, and that is our relationship with our governmental entities, local and state primarily.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, let's start with, from the beginning, L1, and anybody has any?
Can I just make maybe a suggestion? I mean, each board member has an area that they're championing, right? It might be prudent for each board member to kind of lead the discussion on that area, because obviously they've had the interaction with the senior staff regarding that. They can maybe give a little bit background and truly workshop it instead of us all kind of just throwing things out there. I don't know.
If you want to do that, that's fine. I want to do it in a logical order, also
Exactly.
understanding that there may be some reason that conversation jumps us around a little bit because some things tie together.
True.
So if you want to do it that way, that's fine. Well, let's start at the beginning with L1. And who would be the champion on that?
That would be me.
Be you.
Thanks, John.
Good job, John.
Sorry.
Strategically done. Yeah. Well.
So I guess kind of shooting from the hip here, staff has given us a basic overview of the Leading and Learning objective. Board Chair, would you like for me to just answer questions that come up on this objective? Do you want,
No.
I don't know that you need us to go into any more depth as far as.
I think we each need to bring up thoughts, comments, concerns, whether it be positive, negative, in between, but let's just get into, we may just say that, hey, great, everything's right in that area, move on. So if you have any comments, why don't you start with your comments since you're the champion, and then we'll move around.
I will tell you from
Thank you.
I had the opportunity to, of course, meet with my objective leads, and we had a great discussion. I think, in my opinion, there are going to be tweaks along the way as we go through. As I said before, this certainly is not a terminal event, but I do feel as though staff has worked really hard to identify those most critical issues within the Leading and Learning focus, and certainly have put together a great game plan as to how we move forward. I'm excited to work with the team that I'm working with. I think that we have an opportunity, as we all do, for creating a significant amount of positive change in our district. The one thing that I think I questioned in this objective, and not a specific question, but an overall question, is how do we define terms like equitable? How do we define, especially with looking at, for example, access to programs, quality of programs? What determines the quality of a program? Is it the number of people that are graduating with certifications? Is it the number of students participating? So I think some of that discussion we were able to have during our objective lead meeting. And then also, I think looking at making sure that we understand all of our options. So one of the things I actually was going to request of you, Andy, was to schedule, if we could, at some point. I know we all have a very busy schedule and lots of things, but Ms. Archer and I felt like it might be a good idea to have a board workshop on choice options, program options, so that we all had an understanding of what the options are out there as we move forward at looking at equitable allocation of options for our students. And I think that's,
I would agree on that. We should be workshopping choice, especially with the changes in legislation. It's becoming a more dynamic conversation. Anybody else have anything they want to chip in on that?
She
Mrs.
wants to go
Nisi?
next.
Yeah, I had,
She wanted to go first.
yeah, I had some real questions or issues with L1. The first thing I had, all of these were except for Dr. Thetti's portion, is, you know, one of the comments you made, Dr. Blackburn, that you said in regards to our staff is that we do a lot of silo thinking here, and you wanted to get away from that. When I look at the objectives and the strategies, it all seems to be very principle-focused. And all of the activities are all principle-focus groups. And I look at the, for example, the finding instructional time. Everything is principle-focus groups, and the principals are meeting and trying to find instructional time. And I don't see any other groups meeting throughout the year, but principal groups this and principal groups that. And it seems to me that we need to have more people meeting than just principals. And that was one of my comments I made the first round we looked through this. So when I looked at the strategies, for examples on, I look at the first strategy. Well, I looked at, starting with page 8, that strategies, and you look at June 2016 through June 2017, that one's all principles. You look at all the strategies, and I looked at all the strategies, and all of your strategies primarily, I see one that talks about with a resource teacher, but then everything else talks about division directors, coordinators, and principal task force, and so on and so forth. It seemed to me that your strategies for your objectives were very top-down and not bottom-up. And as Dr. Blackburn said, our strengths are people. And if you're trying to affect instruction, the last thing we want to be is top-down here. We get a lot of complaints about that. I believe in bottom-up. And so that was one of my comments I made in my critique the first time around. And I didn't see anything in here. It just seems very top-down. All of your strategies are things we're going to request of teachers. And I know our teachers are real tired of directives from district. And I don't see anything in here like that. It just seems like we're going to get together administratively and tell teachers what we're going to do. And that's not going to work. They're tired of that. They need to be a part of the solution.
I agree. As a matter of fact, that's the comments that I had here, and is, I think it's somewhere along the line we need a question I'd like to ask teachers what we can do to increase or create more instructional time. Like, ask each teacher, give us one thing that you think we can do to help you increase instructional time. Same thing on achievement gap. Ask teachers what we can do to help them improve student point. What thing can we do for them that would help them in that area? It's one thing to make assumptions, but I think it's better to hear from them what is it that's tripping them up? What is that that's keeping them from achieving the goals we all want to achieve?
So what you're both saying is absolutely the intent. So two things I would just review a couple of, we can stick on page 8 and review a couple of pieces on page 8, and then we'll also commit to going back and being even more explicit
On some of the
about
others, it just
intent.
seemed, everything seemed principle focused, even when you move into, I'm going to go to the other strategies where you talked about the principles, improving principles. You talked about the principal improvement groups, the focus groups. We're going to have these principals get together. Well, that's all fine and good, but we've talked about 360 approach. You know, we've talked about all these other things. You know, once again, everything seemed silo-focused. And I thought we were getting away from that and bringing in other groups. And it just seems like principals are just going to rally around principals again. And I want to get away from silo thinking in this organization. And so many of the strategies I saw in L1 were the groups banding around each other. And I think, yes, we can learn from each other, but we can learn from other groups too. And I didn't see anywhere in our strategies where we were looking at those other groups that look in on us. You know, teachers can tell their principals a lot, and outside groups can tell each other a lot, but we have to give them safe opportunities to do that.
So, and that's a great point. I couldn't agree with you more. If we stick on page 8, up on the RACI chart, there's people responsible to get work done, people accountable for the overall objective. But then under C, consulted, you see there principals, teachers, testing accountability, ET, resource teachers, HR, and of course the board champion there. But I do see what you're saying, where the strategy starts out talking about principals conducting the landscape analysis, and later on in that paragraph, it references principals and teacher leaders doing that. But your point, very well taken. We can go through and go over the top in making sure it's a very inclusive intent behind all of these strategies.
Right, and I made that very clear on my feedback. I made it in big markings, and I said it throughout, and on this particular objective on several pages, and I was disappointed to see that there were very few changes on this objective compared to the other objectives. It didn't seem to be changed at all from the original that I saw. So that was, the first thing. What I was hoping to see on this round of the strategic plan as an example, even in her presentation today, and sorry, Dr. Setti, I'm going to use you as an example. When she gave her presentation, I can see it. I'm a visual learner. She gave an example of what I would see in September, not just I'm going to hold a focus group. That doesn't bring anything to mind. She told me who that person was going to be, what those principals were going to see, what the outcome was going to be. Yes, I know there's going to be a discipline plan revisement, but she told me exactly who was going to be involved and what the outcome of that was going to be, what they were going to do next, what that matrix was going to be. I can visualize next year. On some of these other plans, I see the words focus group. I wish I had $1 for every time I saw a focus group in this strategic plan. It doesn't tell me anything. So even though, yes, there are some tangibles in here, there's still words without a picture. I want to see more. I would like to see more meat to this plan, such as Dr. Thetti's, because it still doesn't have a whole lot of what I call meat and potatoes to it. I want to see what they're going to do. Just to have a vague, I'm going to hold a focus group, or I'm going to give more training. Well, what kind of training? What's going to be the outcome of that training? Even so much as this is what the type of material I'm looking at, because training is still very vague. There's also a lot of flowery terms in here. I know Mrs. Henderson and I looked at each other a couple times and said, well, what exactly does that mean? So I don't want a strategic plan that if we're sitting here saying, what does that mean? I can imagine what our constituents are saying. This is supposed to be a plan that people understand, that our teachers understand. So I went a little bit further on that, but that's what I'm looking for, is similar to the objective that we saw for the discipline plan.
Good. Anything? Go ahead, Ms. Henderson.
I just sort of want to piggyback on it. That was very good. When we're putting, we're identifying principles and putting groups together, putting the focus groups together, I guess, how would that be done? I mean, is it going to be you guys determining who they are? Is there going to be some sort of a process? Because there is the perception
Picking friends.
that, we may not be as inclusive as we probably should be. And so there needs to be some sort of, what's the word?
Equitable staff.
The word equitable.
Equitable, there you go. I love that word. Let me define that for you. No, I'm just kidding.
New principals, seasoned principals, north, central,
and,
south, not just who you go,
and as you're
not
putting,
just principals that went through the NOVA program. That's one of the perceptions out there, that you have to have been in a certain program to be a part of a group. Yes.
Yeah, what she said. Let's see, I have several questions in here. And then, in our metrics on page 7, it says that it will be reviewed, the very last bullet says, reviewed by the Division of Leading and Learning, all the data that's, so again, it's just going to be you guys doing that.
If you'd have, win.
I mean, sometimes, I mean, yeah, there's going to have to be a two-way conversation there between the people who gave you that, just to review it and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. That, kind of going back to what she said, to ensure that it's not a top-down, but it's more inclusive. You know, and the plan itself was done with your senior staff, and not the bottom.
No, there were more people than just the senior staff involved in this.
But not way down.
And so part of the plan going forward is to make sure, so this is a plan to create ultimate solutions and path forwards, and it's going to include all of the necessary
And that's what we want to,
voices.
that's exactly what we're saying, is that we need to do that. When we talk about the morale and achievement gaps, and maybe this is getting just a little bit too deep for right now, but I'm just kind of curious, now that we, what are we going to base that data on? What data are we going to use to determine what the achievement, that we're reducing the achievement gaps that we're, because we removed a whole lot of internal testing.
I would agree that that's one of the details that have to be worked out.
Okay.
If you have suggestions on.
I have suggestions.
That you think
No,
is relevant.
I have no,
I would
no,
give
I'm
that
just.
suggestion.
Okay. I will make a suggestion on equity and expanding programs or whatever. Again, the top-down approach may not be effective. In other words, if the adults are making the decisions for the kids, we may miss the boat. It's the students that are coming up that are going to have certain interests that we may want to consider. So some sort of a survey that says, you know, what kinds of things are the kids interested in? Would they want to go to this program? Would they be, you know, that sort of, rather than us as adults choosing what exactly they're going to do, we really do need to expand out and see, because even as Michelle said, you know, they prefer one method of communication and the adults prefer something else. So when you look just from a communications perspective, when you're looking at actually putting in programs into a district, I think that we also need to include the kinds of things that they're interested in, just to make sure that, you know, we understand where they're coming from. We have districts who have created things for students and nobody's coming. And that's what we want to avoid. We don't want to put money into programs or facilities that nobody's going to come to. So I would just keep that in mind as we go forward. And just out of a curiosity, I know that we're doing this as a big plan, but when we talked about discipline ladder back in December, which I thought was a great idea, I kind of thought that maybe some of it might be available for next year, but now it looks like that's not going to be the case.
Right, so I'm pretty sure that I mentioned this back in December as well.
And you may
but
have.
Yeah, that's something
No
that's
problem.
going to take a long time to make sure all of the voices, vertical and horizontal, are at the table for its creation. So if we are fortunate, we should have one actually created by mid, if not third quarter of next year. But mid or third quarter of a school year would be a poor time to roll out an implementation like that. And so we would wait until the following year. We may be able to take advantage of a few early birds that could kind of pilot things at the end of next year. But the conversation back in December and conversation I've had with all the principals is that that is something that we would launch school year 17-18, not next school year. And take a very, very long time, be deliberate about bringing all the voices to the table.
Good for now? We could always come back. Mr. Craig, you have anything you want to contribute?
Real quick, first of all, I think y'all did an excellent job as far as the building of a true strategic plan. So in general, thank you very much for the time and effort you put into it. First of all, Stephanie, I got to tell you, the best comment I heard the entire time was there's history, folklore, and legend. And that truly kind of encapsulates everything that we talk about in a variety of areas. But thank you for bringing that to the forefront, because you're so correct. And it translates over to what Michelle talks about. It translates throughout every piece of what we're talking about. And so all I'll ask is that as we keep going, everybody, all of us as a leadership team, remembers to keep that statement in the back of our minds and evaluate our decision process against that. I think we all do that. Sometimes it's nice just to hear it enunciated, so thank you. But the only thing that I had a question on was, and I don't want to get in the weeds, but only because I'm curious, in educator effectiveness, does that include evaluations, like specifically teacher evaluations, and how we continue to address that issue? It's kind of danced around a little bit in the bullet points, but I can't really put a finger on whether or not we're talking about looking at how we evaluate teachers as part of a bigger process. Do you have any clarification on that, I guess, Dr. Piper?
I have thoughts and hopeful direction that we go in. We have, if we're sticking with teacher, we have the teacher effectiveness, right? The teacher's ability to meet the needs of all of his or her kids. We have that. And then we have this evaluation tool / instrument that really isn't an evaluative tool to begin with. It's really based on professional growth, and it's tied to our assessments, which is a whole nother kind of noisy, disruptive conversation. And so from a practical perspective, I see the effectiveness of my kid's teacher a little separate than what that evaluation, non-evaluation instrument actually says. And so going forward, part of the work is for us, Brevard, to kind of create what that means. Is it as easy as depending on that instrument to inform us on how our teachers are behaving? I think we'd all agree not. The new federal legislation, ESSA, actually expects us locally to create more factors to evaluate our schools and our teachers, but it's work to be determined, if that helps.
I appreciate that, and I think you hit it exactly right. I, as a parent, I judge the effectiveness of my teacher as to what my son and daughter come home with the knowledge in their head and their experience in the classroom. I've never looked at a teacher's scorecard or I wouldn't even care, because that doesn't affect what is coming out the backside. So I appreciate your perspective on that, and hopefully we can understand that the teachers and employees in general also want feedback, but genuine feedback and qualitative feedback that they can actually work with, rather than some abstract thing I think that you mentioned. So.
And I feel good saying that. Conversations I've had with BFT leadership, conversations I've had with all principals and teacher groups, everyone basically feels the same way about that evaluation instrument. The close to kind of compromise or idea that I'll tell you, Richard Smith and I kind of talked about, and I've been beta testing it in other conversations with principals and parents and other groups, is that what's really troublesome, second to the evaluation being connected to the test score, what ends up being really troublesome is that teacher working her heart away and then reading something that's pretty critical about his or her performance that's based on like a snapshot. And so the teacher takes great offense to that. The principal takes great offense to having to do it. I think everyone involved would much rather have a verbal conversation about what, if any, challenges you saw in my classroom during a snapshot of time. And so there's the feeling, you listen to teachers on what they would prefer. You listen to principals on what they'd prefer to do, and it's like they worked it all out before they spoke to me in separate conversations. And so I think if we can work within any and all authority that we have locally, but still challenging our state to do something different with their direction. Mr. Ziegler and I were with the Central Florida Coalition yesterday, and you know, when this topic hit the floor, the state representative that was there, I mean, he couldn't take notes fast enough. This is a very disruptive, damaging piece to employee morale.
Thank you.
Mrs. Belford, do you have anything else to add to this?
I think I'm good.
I've got two points. One is expounding, I think, on what Mrs. Henderson was referring to with programs. Mine is specifically choice programs, and I think the terminology, and Dr. Blackburn, you've spoken about this before, but is evaluating the relevance of choice programs. And by that, of course, we mean relevant to student needs, relevant to community needs, and what is the talent pipeline that has need and therefore opportunity for students to have careers. Relevant versus, let's not get lost in the conversation of, I don't think it's really relevant that we reap rewards or scores in our world because a student's need outweighs our needs. And I think we've leaned a little too heavily in the past on our choice programs, putting a feather in our cap and not benefiting our students, our community as much. And so while I realize that certain programs bolster our scores, I don't think anybody on this board is as concerned about our scores as about we are students. Would that be? Where you're going with that? Okay. And I'm glad, Dr. Blackburn, you've mentioned that multiple times, so I know we're on track to evaluate that. Thank you. Also, L4 on page 28, talking about, and it's kind of interestingly, very subtly stated here, discipline incidents and disproportionality decrease. I just want to make sure that we don't go down a politically correct road as opposed to a fair and equitable road when we talk about the topic of disproportional discipline. I've been vocal on this before, I don't know if in public, but I'll just say that to me disproportionate discipline is when I have various groups, all of individual committing the same offense and not getting the same discipline. Until we see evidence of that, I don't think we can say disproportional discipline. To say one particular group is disciplined more than the other may be very measurable, but the question is that anything relevant to our world that we can even do anything about, as opposed to, is that a reflection of the community at large, and we have no control over the community at large. As much as we'd like to help solve that problem, you got to know the root cause of that problem in order to solve it. And I think in some of those conversations, the root cause does not necessarily exist in our world. And so I just want to not lose sight of fair and equitable discipline.
That's a great point, Mr. Ziegler. So, you know, I want to be clear on my thoughts, and I agree with many of the things, if not all of what you just said. Right now, we don't have a plan that ensures the same misbehavior in Palm Bay receives the same consequence as the same misbehavior up in MIMS. And so this will create that. However,
Or even in the same school.
or even in the same school.
At the same time.
Right, same grade, different grade levels in the same school receive different consequences, right? So this plan will fix that. If there are student subgroups right now disproportionately committing acts, then this plan isn't going to fix that at all. What we need, you mentioned the C word, community. I will tell you, there are things that our teachers wrestle with in classrooms by way of student behavior that no Ruby Payne book or Harry Wong manual can adequately advise them on. there are behaviors that our kids, that I'm just going to be honest with you, community leaders, parent leaders have to all band together to make sure those acts just do not happen. But if they continue to happen, and if all we do, which is what we can control, create an equitable, fair, appropriate distribution of consequences, we're still going to see some of the same patterns that are disturbing to community members. So it's us doing our part, and there are a lot of people who aren't in this room that have to do their part also.
Agreed. Agreed. Okay, thank you.
May I make a follow-up comment on that? Just to kind of piggyback on what Dr. Blackburn has said, although this discipline plan certainly isn't going to directly impact disproportionate actions by specific subgroups of students, I think it's one small piece of the pie when we look at the overall focus of the social emotional needs being met of students. I think that's where we see a difference in the disproportionate action or disproportionate choices in some subgroups of students, because that social emotional focus begins to address some of those things so that we see fewer of those actions in those subgroups. And I think that's an important thing to note, not that we are, I don't think we can stick our head in the sand. I also don't think that we can overly focus in the wrong areas, but I think it goes back to that looking at the whole child and ensuring that not only are we giving them strategies, tools to be successful, but then we are also addressing choices, less than helpful choices, in a uniform way throughout the district, so that we don't have some students getting away with things that others aren't.
Anybody else have input on this section? We'll move on to our next section. Mrs. Henderson, you want to start that one off?
Thank you. I had a wonderful meeting with my team, and the first time that I got to work with Dr. Kent. And I thought that you'll see that some of this, there's quite a few changes in here on some of them. And I thought that she brought a really nice perspective on what diversity looks like. It's not just diversity of people, but of thought and other things. I thought that was just, I really appreciated that. And I think that'll go well with where we want the district to go. Also, I see the employee excellence as it's not just teachers, it's not just staff, it's not just senior staff. This is everybody, because without our bus drivers, our kids don't get here. Without our custodians, our children aren't healthy in school. Without the cafeteria workers, they don't get fed, which makes them cranky, which means our teachers can't, you get the picture. But we all work together as a team, and I think that being able to go through and look at compensation and go through and evaluate who does what in the organization, and giving everybody the opportunity to move if they choose, to move up or laterally or however they want to do it. Having those options and being able to provide something I'm very excited about on this. So I'm really pleased to be a part of this one. We talked a little bit about the centralized onboarding process and the fact that we want to get the timeline shorter so that it doesn't take as long to get our employees on, and also the timing of when we choose our employees, because that apparently has made a big difference in other areas, and so we will be looking forward to seeing how that works for Brevard County. Auditing our job descriptions terribly needs to be done. Hasn't been done for a long time. That we, during the cuts that Ms. Searcher mentioned, we have people in our organization doing more. We lost people, so they had to pick up other processes or functions from other people. So our current job descriptions do not match what our people do, and it's not only from a senior staff level, it's also from a custodian level. We added square footage to our custodians. Our bus drivers do more. So everybody's doing a little bit more, and so the review of that is going to be of great importance to our district as well. And giving our opportunities and educational opportunities The other thing was the employee voice and ideas. I think that sort of goes back to what Mrs. Nisi was talking about before. There are a lot of people in this organization who have a lot of ideas, who want to bring them forward, but are, what's the word? Afraid. They're afraid to. They're afraid if they get into a room like this, or even with 100 people, and they say, you know, if you did this differently, then somebody's going to come down on them and say, you should have never said that because we didn't want Mr. Ziegler to know he actually did it that way. So, we need to, when we do this and we give employee voice, I really want us to be able to give them voice. They have great ideas on how we can save money, how we can do our processes better, and they're the ones who are in the trenches, and Dr. Blackburn and I have talked about this before, and I mentioned it more than once about being the widget makers, but the people who actually make the widgets really know the processes and what they're doing in their jobs. And so we need to really value what they have to say. Now, not everybody's going to say something we want to hear. It may not all be relevant. Some ideas might be better, but we really do need to listen to with an open mind for that. So that's about all I have to say about that. But that's really, really, really important to me and to Mrs. Nisi.
All right, let's start at the other end. Mr. Craig, you have anything on this item?
Just had one, maybe two quick questions. And I know I think Ms. Nisi mentioned it in the previous section, but we talked about 360-degree reviews and the possible use of them at some level. And I'm not sure if this is thinking in that direction. Specifically, if you look at the first one for building principal capacity, where that fits in. Sometimes, it's more for food for thought. I'm not sure where it, if it's been discussed, if that's something that needs to be discussed or already has been. The other thing I was going to mention was in that first subsection there, or part of the first part of the theme, the talk of a mentorship program, and mentorship, I think, is critical to every employee, not just in the principal range. Every employee that walks in the door should have some sort of sponsor, mentor. We do, in a regard, do that, but sometimes we load up a mentor with 3, 4, 5 people, and that loses the actual purpose of the mentorship. Firsthand, I've listened to that over the last week, and how that is failing. So I think when we look at mentorship, we really need to look at that as an opportunity to affect the culture of this organization as people walk in the door, that they're welcome, that they understand what it is that they're here for, how they fit into the system, and how this strategic plan affects them. We can utilize that mentorship in so many ways, but it has to be down to every level, from a substitute teacher that is hired to a bus driver, to a cafeteria worker, teacher, to a senior staff member. I mean, everybody needs to have that person that they can go to. And I would like to make sure that is identified.
Took note on the mentorship piece, and for our response on the 360-degree review. So right now, throughout the organization, most people, I think all, receive contribution to their evaluation from their direct supervisor. Okay,
Correct.
so we have that level covered. But peer-to-peer contribution to an evaluation, subordinate, quote-unquote, contribution to an evaluation, constituent contribution to an evaluation, we don't have those yet. I would say first wave of this movement is giving teachers the opportunity to evaluate their culture and their principle by way of the Insight Survey. Another round of that is allowing principals to do just that with district staff. And so I'd like to get to the place where all employees have an opportunity to evaluate their supervisors, their work environments, and that we're including some way, shape, or form constituents as well, because we're a service organization.
Okay.
We're moving down the line, or?
Moving down the line. on
Down
this
the
one,
line.
yes.
Okay. First, and I know it was already referenced, but I love the idea of giving employees a voice. I think that is so critical, but also an uphill battle to develop that culture and those relationships that make them feel comfortable in using that voice. But I do think that it's critical to the success of the organization as a whole. Another area, strengthening our administrative pipeline, I think is going to be as critical to our future success. I know we have a pretty good principal development program, but we're at a point, if you look at our recent hires, not that our recent hires are not great selections, but we're not drawing in sitting principals. We're drawing in lots of APs who are moving up, which we then have to fill AP positions with. So I think important, and I think the team is there as far as looking at it, but I think important to look multi-layered deep in developing those leadership skills. We were at the Superintendent's Advisory Committee meeting, the last one for the year, last Friday, and there was a comment made by one of the group leaders that I thought was very interesting, and she said that she had very much enjoyed the process of their team coming together and making decisions, and that it was a unique opportunity for her because although she had led within her school, she had never before led people that she didn't know. That she really had to create a functional group from people who didn't know each other, that came from very diverse backgrounds, and she was commenting on what a great opportunity that had been for her. So I want to make sure that we are thinking outside the box when we're creating those opportunities to grow our leadership pipeline, and making sure that we're challenging people in all the ways that they need to be challenged as they grow to ensure that they're ready to step into those positions. Because I think we have, as we all know, education as a whole is facing some challenges with regard to recruiting. So I just thought that was a great comment from her and a great opportunity for her to have been able to pull that team together and move forward, and they've done really a great job. The other kind of soapbox that I'm sure you all are aware of, that I have been on, is allocations. And one of the things that I would very much like to look at in determining our allocations is, number one, differentiated allocation, which I know we've talked about to some extent. And we have some of that going on where we can plug people in various places. But I think more importantly, looking at what are the true needs. Looking, for example, I know as long as I have been involved in the district, at least for the past several years, we're always adding teachers at 6-day count. So if we're always adding teachers at 6-day count, can we not start with a few more than the minimum so that we don't have to do that add at 6-day count if we're, and part of that also factors into our projections, which I know goes into the facilities, but I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there, as Mr. Ziegler said would probably happen. And that is that although we do look at our district-wide projections, we don't look at how valid our year-to-year projections are per school. And so, for example, if 3 years ago we said we were going to have this many students at the school, and last year we said we were going to have this many students at the school, and this year we say we're going to have this many students next year, but those projections have been off for 3 years, they certainly impact our allocations. And so I think in going through that process, we really need to look at that and see how accurate have we been? Do we need to make adjustments there? And then, of course, taking into consideration that our allocations cannot necessarily be uniform. So, for example, currently our janitorial allocations are done by square footage at the school. Well, square footage at one school and square footage at another is not necessarily the same. If you have a brand new house, your maintenance needs are going to be very different than if you're living in an old house. If you have 15 people living in your house, your maintenance needs are going to be very different than if you have 3 people living in your house. And we have the same things taking place at our schools. So those are some of the things that I think that we need to make sure to focus on as we look at this employee excellence piece, because I think, unfortunately, in some situations, we're setting our employees up for failure. Another area within the allocation, and then I'm going to get off my soapbox, I promise.
I just want to add to that.
Another area within allocation, and I've had some discussion with some of my objective lead team on these issues, but our ESE allocations. You know, a lot of times we base our allocation based on number of students that are staffed into self-contained classes at the school. However, if we take the time to talk to our teachers and to our staffing specialists, we might find out that there are another 10 anticipated to be staffed into that unit. We don't plan ahead for that. We wait, we're reactive in that situation. And I think that's something that we have to be really careful of, because in the end, it hurts our students, it hurts our teachers, it hurts our morale. It just goes against all that we're trying to achieve with this strategic plan. So I'm hoping for lots of analysis in that staffing allocation.
Can I just add something?
Before we continue, do any of the board members need the slides on the screen? I think, Mr. Budo, you can probably have a seat.
Got a good view from here, though.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be standing for 3 hours, and I'm sure you don't either. Well, if we need it, we'll have you run back
Can I
up
just-
there. Or go ahead, Ms. Henderson.
In speaking of the allocations, Mrs. Belford, I think that some of the things that are not necessarily taken into consideration, that obviously do need to be taken into consideration, are our out-of areas. We have a very robust out-of-area system, and we let people go to whatever schools, and sometimes there is the allowance to let more people in than we probably should have, and that needs to be looked at in a different way as we go forward.
I guess I disagree with that.
Mrs. Nisi?
Okay. Well, and thanks to our legislature, it's going to get even bigger, so.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a whole nother issue.
Okay. Well, we were talking about hires and employees, so I'm just going to add a couple comments there, Carol, add to your list. When we do new hires, do we ever follow up at like 3 months and 6 months with a simple survey of how are we doing? I guess I was just wondering, since we're adding to your list with all your free time as you're eating bonbons and sipping coffee.
Sitting on the beach.
Yeah. I guess I was thinking as, you know, we're trying.
Live at the beach.
You know, I guess I was sitting here thinking and taking all this in, where, you know, not only are we trying to get the best, but we're trying to keep the best. You know, since we lost people to Osceola County, and I understand we just lost another one to Osceola County, so I was wondering if people were, you know, we all know they're overwhelmed when they just start, but if maybe at 3 months, we just send them a quick survey, you know, now that you've had a chance to settle in, you know, how did we do, you know, in terms of our processes, and then, you know, maybe another one at 6 months, just to see if there's anything we could have done, just to let them know, you know, we're glad you're still here type of thing. You know, I guess I was kind of thinking along those lines. It's hard to be a newbie, and, you know, just kind of checking up, maybe if there's a way to fine tune our processes. That would just be a quick, you know, we always do, I'm assuming or hoping we do exit surveys with people, but maybe just kind of an entry, checking up on you. You know, I heard the mentor thing, which I think is great, but it would be kind of a quick 3 months, 6 months. They will have settled in and hopefully are happy and in their role, but just kind of a quick check-in to see that we didn't forget anything with them and that we still know they're here. The other part I was thinking about.
Can I speak to that, Cory?
Pardon?
Can I speak to that?
Oh, please.
Okay, absolutely, that's a tremendous best practice for HR. In my former life, we did, new employees were one of our customer groups, and they would have, within the first 90 days of employment, we would launch a survey, and what it did was help us audit our onboarding processes from recruit to hire and make sure that we did plug them in. If we had anything that we needed to change as an in-process measure, we utilized that data continuously. So that absolutely is something I have used before, and I certainly will implement here. The key is managing the technology around it and making sure that I don't overload the systems to do that, but absolutely, we'll be identifying who our customer groups are, and then we'll be monitoring our performance. The other thing that I have done, I have utilized exit surveys. Those are very difficult in all of the positions I've been in to capture that data. One of the things, though, I did utilize was a stay survey. I analyzed the workforce and found when people were stepping off on average, the largest percentage. At that point, it was about 5 years. So I gathered everybody who was in their 4th year, told them how much I loved hearing, having them
How much
stay.
I love you.
And I asked them directly, what would make you leave? And what would make you stay? And so that type of feedback of people who are already vested in us, how can I get them beyond to that vested point of 7 years in the state of Florida, we were doing everything we could to get that feedback back to those that could actually have a direct impact on the employees to enhance employee engagement and satisfaction. So those are the type of things that, best practices I would definitely bring to the district.
Okay. The other group I was making a note of here, because I've talked to some of these people, what about those administrative applicants that are out there interviewing but not getting hired? What are we doing for that group? You know, we have these people that want to be AP, that want to be APs. You know, they've gone through that, and they're not getting hired. What are we doing to either work with them to become better at interviewing, or talk with them about maybe they're not going to be a good fit? I know I've talked with some of you about a couple of the people that I know that they may be really good people, they might be a really good fit somewhere, but they're not either good at interviewing, or maybe we need to get them some more experiences. We really don't have a program for them, is what I'm finding out.
Okay.
And so I kind of throw that out to you guys as, you know, we're talking about needing to better grow our own, but we have this group of what I'm going to call the misfits, is they've gone through the program we have, and we say we're going to bring up more people, but we have a group of people right now who are out there interviewing. They've gone through our program, but they're not getting hired. What can we do for that group?
And again, that great best practice. I think we do need to have a program for feedback for those that we are seeing that are not getting through. I can tell you, in the short tenure that I've been here, I did participate in a mock interview with our aspiring leaders through our Preparing New Principals program. Those were very emerging assistant principals looking to hone their craft of their interviewing skills. It is a skill. It does take practice, and I do think that we need to put something like that in place. I think it's tremendous, and I have worked with that before. We actually created a handbook that gave them not only opportunities to do mock interviews, but also gave them research to read, but it also gave them actual actionable events that they could go back and utilize in their home schools, with their communities, with SAC, with PTSA, so that they had a broader global view of what their job was. Because coming four walls of a classroom and having that perspective to a global perspective where you're no longer just assisting children, you're assisting the adults who assist children, and having those robust conversations around an interview is a different way of looking at things.
Well, some of them need to get out into other buildings, so how do we help them do that?
Well, that's something too. We can look at HR. How long have people sat? I don't know if this comes under folklore or not. I'm still learning. But if we have a culture here where administrators stay forever in a building, that's something I think we need
do
to
have some issues
discussion
with that.
around.
So I guess I would challenge, wherever it fits in here, as you're trying to develop that core group and people, that try to find, we have some people out there who have done everything you have in here. We need to either sit down and tell them, you're just not a good fit here, and there may be some of those people, but we need to sit down and have that honest conversation with them. Or we need to have another program name for them, whether it's a mentor I don't know what we want to call it, but we need to work with them because they're floundering. Are they they're just as important as the people we're bringing up the pipeline. So I don't know what you want to call it, but I challenge you to incorporate that in here, because I do think we have some good people out there that would fit, but we're losing them because they're going out there and interviewing, and are ready to give up and leave the profession. I know because I've talked to them. Those are my comments.
I think that's a great point, because I knew somebody who was applying for AP and interviewing, and I'm like, why is this person not
and maybe
hired?
Making finalists.
And I started, I asked Dr. Mullins and a few other people. I said, well, they're just not interviewing well. They're just not selling themselves. And so, well, give them some feedback, give them some guidance, and then they adjusted, and they fit in, and they got a job, and they're doing it great. So I like that. A feedback program, I think, would help more people be successful. I also like the suggestion of the exit surveys, and I realize they're real difficult to get done, but they really can tell a story. Unfortunately, when people leave a job, it's like, not my problem anymore, really don't care, I'm moving on, somebody else can deal with the problem. But sometimes there's reasons why people leave the job, leave the district, ask for voluntary transfers, even on voluntary transfers. It'd be nice, well, why is it that you want out of there? Is it to be closer to family? Is it to drive less miles? Or is it just a conflict in that environment? And those things tell stories that then make it easier for you to correct problems, which inevitably helps children succeed.
I just know we're going to be needing lots of new administrators, and so
Mr. Chair.
just want to make sure we don't lose some people that just with a little fine tuning could be excellent administrators for
Yeah,
us.
that's a really good point. Mr. Craig?
Dr. Blackburn, do you have, or have you had experience in previous life, I guess, with the administrative pool concept, where you would interview and be placed in a pool rather than continually interview for open positions, and then failing that, you have to go and interview at the exact same for another open position. Have you had that before?
I have had experience with.
Is it good?
It's
Bad?
actually called
Others?
the pool. It's good, but it all comes down to what I think Mr. Ziegler and Mrs. Nisi just talked about, the feedback. Because whatever we call the structure, we're going to have, the LeBron Jameses of the world who go in first time, knock everyone's socks off, and they're in. And we're going to have, we're going to have the Grant Hills of the world who, they have to go to school for 4 years and work really, really hard, and then they do well on their first team, but not so well on their second team, and then they require more coaching, but at the end of the day can end up still being that all-star, right? And so whatever we call the structure, we have to make sure that if we find that an individual isn't having success, that we still own the progress of that individual and we do something. The critical feedback is essential, right? I've also found lots of success, and I love it when I've seen this, where year one, the person really, really struggles, receives some feedback, and year two, the person struggles a little less. Year three, not only are they not struggling, but now they're starting to actually run and do well. By the time that person hits their stride, I've seen those individuals become as successful, if not more successful, than the person who was the rock star from day one. And so the sentiments are right. These are our people, and we own a lot of their progress. Now, I will, on the other side of the coin, I will say to aspiring leaders, I'm very supportive of people who aspire to be in a position of leadership, but I'm very hard on them also, because self-directed growth should be very evident in any person who is raising their hand and aspiring to be a leader. So there's what the organization can provide, but the person should be very self-directed, have a lot of independence, a lot of autonomy, and really, really want it. And the reason why that's so important is because once this person becomes a principal, right, even though we have support structures, and that person has to be there every day and has to self-start, has to self-analyze, they have to self-grow. So it's a lot of it, that comes into it. But in a nutshell, we have to own our people and make sure they're succeeding, whatever we call the program.
I got two areas to touch on. One is employee diversity, which we all agree is very important. And I was glad to see on page 50, increase percentage of minority instructional candidates. I think that's a big piece to solving that diversity of employee issue. However, in the same line, it says to better align with diversity with student population. I still don't get that. Somebody explain to me why we need to align employee diversity with student diversity. How does that benefit students? Go ahead. Anybody can take a shot at it.
This is actually a conversation that I have had at length on various individuals I've had the conversation with. And part of the problem is that our students need to see people who look like them role modeling, people who come from a background like them role modeling. And so if you are a purple student and everyone else around you is pink,
You're picking on me.
And I'm picking on you because you're purple. And everyone else around you is pink, and the pink people are the successful people. It's hard for a purple person to envision that they can be one of those successful people. And whether we're looking at the color that someone is wearing, or whether we're looking at the place that a person grew up, or whether we're looking at the dynamics of the home environment, kids need to know that they're not alone and there are people like them that have gotten past it, have gotten through it, and are successful. And so ensuring that we have those opportunities for those students to connect with people that they can identify with, that can help them to see the possibility of the future, is incredibly important.
And I could see that more from, because you said that they're successful. So that would be more of an administrative or leadership position. The argument I have an issue with is to say, well, because you have, like, the teachers need to relate to the students. Well, that's not going to happen per classroom. So that just needs to be in the environment in general, not in specifics. You know, somebody says, well, you have X amount of this population of students and X amount of teachers, but is that going to be based on per school? Is that going to be based on per district? I just don't see it. I just don't see it aligning. I like the increase the candidates portion of this, but I just want us to be careful. I know it could be a politically incorrect topic to say that you don't give somebody, you don't pick somebody based on their diversity. You pick the best candidate, in my opinion, for the position. And I don't care if they lean more towards a minority group or and I don't even know what a minority group is anymore. I think we're all minorities, no matter what we are. I think it's the best candidate, and I think that the diversity of our workforce is directly proportional to our candidates. And I think that's the best way to work on that and get our communities to help us increase that. So I just want to be careful where we're focusing on when we talk about, when you talk about aligning with diversity of students, now you're talking about choosing your employees based on that, and I think you're getting away from equal decision-making on quality of candidates.
I'll give you a great example of that topic of a discussion on NPR about the transition of teachers. And initially, teachers were males. It was actually thought to be inappropriate for females to stand up in front of a group, especially if they were unmarried females, to stand up in front of a group. What'd you say, let alone pregnant? So initially, the majority of our teachers were males. And as society changed and teachers were making less and men needed to make more money and they had more opportunities to go into higher paying positions, then a lot of the male teachers came out of the teacher pool, if you will, and went into other higher paying positions, which is when females started to come into the teacher realm. And so there are perspectives based on your experiences in life, and your perspectives impact the students that you work with. So for how many years did we hear that females were not good at math and science? And teachers, without directly saying that to students, or in some instances directly saying that to students, they really beat that into the heads of our students. And so females believed that they were not good at math and science, and males believed that they were not good at English and reading. And so it's important, if we are going to help all of our students be successful regardless of their background, that we have people that represent all of those possibilities, and not necessarily just in administration. Teachers are incredibly successful. They're incredibly important in the world, and to ensure that we have teachers that are very diverse in background, very diverse in experience, and very diverse in their ability to connect and help students identify with the future, I think is critical. I don't think anyone, though, is endorsing a quota system where we identify blocks and fill those blocks. But I do think that we have to put the effort in to ensure that we are getting people into the system that can identify with all of those students. Because oftentimes, people won't step up and apply. People won't go into those positions without some encouragement, without some direct ask, and sometimes helping them to be that self-starter initially, to show some growth and some leadership skills.
I like the comment about it's not a quota system,
Yes.
because over the years, that's what I've heard in the community is that there needs to be a direct alignment, and I don't think there needs to be a direct alignment. There just needs to be a strong effort. Okay. The other one was about competition for employees from different, and I think it was mentioned about other educational environments. So, you know, competing with private schools and charter schools and whatever. I think it's just as important now for teachers in the educational environment, but for, you know, we have a large corporate type general functional, you know, whatever employees that we're competing with all corporate environments. And you know, we've had this conversation about market competitiveness with salaries. And I know in the past that we've had people say, well, we don't pay as well as whatever, and I like the fact that we include evaluating the value of benefits, which sometimes is a very hard evaluation. So I think that's really important to make a point. The other problem that we run into, and I know we, as elected officials, we get pressure on, is I really don't appreciate from the community the feeling that because somebody works in a government organization, or especially an educational organization, they should work for less. And I just disagree with that. If people don't like that, they can find somebody else to sit in the seat, but I think people need to be paid fairly with what the job responsibility is, whether they're in a government, educational, or private corporate environment. And so I agree with evaluating market of competitiveness and comparing to private, not just saying, okay, well, we're gonna succumb to those beliefs. And I just make sure we evaluate that. And I know that's what you're thinking. I just wanted to throw that out there because that conversation just irks me that people out there make those comments. And I think that's all I have. Next. Who's next?
It's capital. So I like the way Dane presented this because really the three subsets here really do all kind of flow together. Certainly, as he alluded to, there was some big change to the original, maybe at least the second point there, bullet point, or second slide, C2, as to how we approach that. I appreciate that because I think it is important that we identify all capital funding and we evaluate it. That includes local, state, federal, and also internal. What we have already on us. What are we carrying right now? What are carrying costs? How do those fall into what we do with facilities and or properties going forward? And certainly we need to exhaust that discussion before we move outside of the building, perhaps, for lack of a better example. We need to make sure we have taken care of everything and we have exhausted the capability and the ability to pay for things here before we start expanding the envelope to look for new ways to do it or continuing new ways to do it. Probably the most important or the closest alligator to the canoe, as I like to say, is the Capital Advisory Committee. I think this is critical, and I know that we take concepts and we don't want to just jump right in and do things, but I truly believe that this committee is a great not only idea but a requirement for what Dane and his team has kind of put together as the strategic portion of this, but also how they're going to attack some very close issues, close meaning in the near term. And so I want to make sure that that stays at the forefront of our discussion as we go forward, and that Dr. Blackburn, you can maybe kind of push that ahead. And I know we don't want to like pick and choose things, but that one committee I think could affect so many things that we are talking about, both from schools and programs of choice to ESE to teacher morale. I mean, it really does affect our facilities and how we plan and how we are going to allocate programs and facilities affects so many things, and having that committee, I think, just as municipalities do and just as businesses do, having that outside input on how we go about managing that and getting best practices from both business and the educational cohort, that we make sure that is kind of one of the things that we we hang a flag on and go, yeah, we need to get this done pretty quick and get that that committee going so that we start getting that community involvement. Other than that, I think Dane kind of laid it out pretty well. And, questions?
Mrs. Henderson?
No.
Yeah. Start with you this time.
You want to go? Yeah, we'll let her go first.
All right, you can defer.
My only concern on this one is if people are going to confuse capital advisory with capital outlay, because the names are so close to each other, if you need to distinguish the names, so that, I mean, I would just suggest names, something the name be totally different. I just know I set up here going capital advisory, CAC, COC.
That's a good point.
I just think there's going to be a lot of confusion about what's the difference, what are the roles, and I would suggest a total name change, because otherwise you're going to have total confusion. That's my, I love everything else except the name.
That's a good point. We can come up. Some quirky acronym. that
Yeah,
makes
something,
sense.
I just know how easily people get confused, and I just think you ought to go with something totally different.
And just for my edification, the alligator being close to that's a good thing.
You're not on my
Yes,
iPhone.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. That's the thing we got to take care of first.
Just making sure.
It's
not a good thing if you're in the committee.
It's not a good thing if you're in the committee, which we are. So we're trying to, take care of that.
Yeah, I like that you made a lot of changes. You addressed a lot of my concerns. I think I made mine real clear, what my concerns were, and I appreciate the changes and the focus. Thank you.
Mrs. Henderson, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to what I said originally, and I apologize for this, but I'm just not a big fan of doing things by committee. I do not know what this committee would look like. I do understand that, when it comes to facilities, when it comes to adding programs, that it can be an emotional thing. It needs to be a logical thing. That's why we hire professionals to do this stuff. I still think that you can have community transparency without having a committee. I think that when you limit it to 5 people that maybe the board appoints and a few people around the community, that you eliminate a whole lot of people who may have input. And I understand that it says advisory, but originally it said that he had to have consensus too. Does it still say that? Okay, because I would totally not disagree with that. I don't think that this district has to do what 10 people on a committee who aren't experts in that field and do this every day for our organization. I have concerns about the committee. The other thing is we do have a capital outlay committee that every time we do something with facilities or try to get impact fees, we go through that, which is a different kind of committee because it is a member of every one of our cities and our county. So now you've got a broader picture rather than just someone who might be mad about this or doesn't want that program, and I certainly don't want it up there because it's going to be where I want it. I just think that you really need to, I'm just not a big fan of this for a whole lot of reasons. I don't think that it would add value to what we do. Because I really believe that you can have that transparency and inclusiveness of explaining to the community what it is you're planning to do and have input from everyone and not just 5 or 10 people on a committee. And what are the, right now we pay for things from, right now, half-cent sales tax, ad valorem taxes. What other ways are we looking at adding to this?
Well,
And how will the, looking at all the different ways to fund something affect any timelines, or will it just be like a one-day thing that you'd have to go through?
Let me answer the first question.
Okay.
There are many sources of capital funding. I'll go through the ones at the state level. Our CFO and I disagree that the 1.5 mil, because it's non-voted, I consider it a state. It is actually from a local source, but it's non-voted. The state allows us to take that. PICO, CONDS, fuel tax rebate, the federally connected, which we
Make sure you
just
talk into the microphone.
which we just
There.
received, and some grants if they're available. Those are relatively consistent. Obviously, the 1.5 mils grows as the property values grow, assuming they keep the 1.5 mils steady.
Bite your tongue.
And the PICO looks fairly steady for the next 4 or 5 years. If you take that as your base then, and you say that I verified a need that exceeds that level of funding for your programs, for your support functions, for the community requests, you then must look to other sources to fund that need. And typically, because the state has reduced their funding, they have forced the school districts to look for local funding. Though our current sources of that are, in fact, impact fees from our local government and the sales surtax. We also generate a little bit of interest from our investments. We generate a little bit of income from property sales, surplus property sales. Not real property, but and we do a little bit of that also. Food service actually gives some capital, transfers some of their funding to capital because we have not been able to fund their refreshment of their food service lines and whatnot. The other possibilities are general obligation bonds and a millage increase, all voter approved. So we have in this community been the beneficiaries of the impact fees that were approved by the county commission. That's a county commission prerogative to do that, change it, modify it, eliminate it. And the sales surtax as opposed to a general obligation bond or a millage increase.
Speaking of impact fees, is the county going to bring that back up again?
So, great question. If you
it's
recall,
been a year, right?
Yeah, if you recall the urgency that was talked about under, we don't have it up there, but the second objective profile 2. And so we're going to work towards that most urgently and going through the process, and Dane can speak to this better than I can, but going through the process to ensure that we're using our current resources adequately and there is a long-range plan in place, then yes, we're going to do that. You can talk more about it, Dan.
I'll be brief. I believe that.
Microphone. You
Am
just
I-
got to talk close to it.
Okay. I believe that it's a sequential path here. I believe that the board and the community needs to believe that we need capacity that requires the use of impact fees to build that capacity, as opposed to simply using it to fund, as we have been, fund debt. I believe that an essential component to get down that path is the formation of either the communication to or the formation of a committee. Let me start that again. Either the formation of a committee to assist us in communicating that to the public and some forum where the board understands a projected need for capacity and the best plan to get there involves the use of impact fees. I believe that needs to be in place before we say to the county commission, one, we want to collect and use the impact fees that have been sitting there for 2 years. And two, that we would like to modify the existing ordinance and interlocal agreement to give us a little more flexibility and to align in some measure with the current needs study.
Okay, then I want to go back to what she said earlier about a workshop on capital. I do think that we need to have that for a whole lot of reasons. And I think that needs to be done sooner than later so that everybody understands. And then I would like to have an update to the board, and I know it doesn't really have to do with this right now, but what our plan is for, are we going to continue to use impact fees to pay debt? And is there a way that we can start saving them?
Can I just make a comment on that, please? I was surprised to find we were using it. However, the debt has to be paid from somewhere.
Right.
So if we have used impact fees because of the restrictions and something we've allowed, we have freed up money that would have come out of the local capital improvement millage, which has a little more flexibility than the impact fees. So I don't want anyone to think that using impact fees, we've taken money away because the debt was going to be paid either from the LCI funding or from the impact. So I think what we've been trying to do when I looked into it was allow a little more flexibility in how we use those funds because we're so restricted for the impact fees. If we can get to where we loosen that and get the county to work with us on that, that allows us to do more with the impact fees, and we'll go back to using the capital outlay. But it's not like we've lost the capital outlay. We've just freed it up in the LCI area.
Right. Okay. And on the C3, on engaging all stakeholders in the planning and capital allocation process, what does that mean? Who? What, when?
Well, that would be similar to an advisory group. Or the purpose there is to allow input from a broad range of stakeholders, whether they be government or community, parents. I think the goal there would be to present a plan and say this is what we perceive as the need based on our projections, and this is the best plan that we are recommending. This is our recommended plan to solve that issue. The goal would be a consensus, and I use that word sparingly here, or advisedly, that there is no, that none of the goal would be that there is an agreement, I guess, that none of the community groups or the local governments have a better way to approach that plan. So at the end of that process, there's a recommended plan that involves a funding source, whether that's impact fees or any other source, and then that everyone's in agreement that having that be the best plan with that funding source, we proceed down that path.
Thank you.
And just to expound, it's not, that C3 is not just capacity, it's program expansion as well, and the facility costs that go with program expansion. So going back to the comments about, are we building the programs that are appropriate for what the kids want to do and that what the community needs? That's, I think, part of that whole stakeholder thing. We've got kids that are involved, teachers involved, the community, the business community. What is it that we, if we're going to build a new program and we're going to put facility money and capital money into it, we got to better make sure that it's what's required. So I think that's also a piece of that.
Mrs. Belford.
Just a couple of quick questions. One on the advisory committee. When I think of a capital advisory committee, let me back up. I'm the board appointee on the COC, which is the Capital Outlay Committee. So I attend those meetings as they come up. So I have in my head kind of what they do, and that's the representatives from all of the municipalities. When I think of a capital advisory committee, I think more along the lines of our audit committee. that would kind of be looking at things and giving their input, their recommendations. One of the beautiful things that I see about this proposal for a capital advisory committee named something else, so we don't all get confused, is that if you look at the folks on our audit committee, they have buy-in in our district. They are looking at the nuts and the bolts and the ins and the outs, and they become our cheerleaders. So I feel like not only does this proposed committee give us that sort of input from the community and let the community have some ownership in what's going on in their school district, but I think it also ties into our communication plan in creating those in the community that can also be our cheerleaders. And I think it's important to get multiple perspectives. One of the things that came up on at the last COC meeting, and Mr. Theodore, I understand you and Sue, I think, are going to meet with Peggy Busaka in Titusville.
Yes, ma'am, and Scott Morgan in West Melbourne.
Okay, great. One of the conversations that came up there was in looking at capacity, especially, it was mentioned on the north end of the county, and the potential growth as the community rebounds. And I think that's an important consideration. But the other thing that I have to question is, as we have communities attempting to rebound from recession and end of the space shuttle program, are we holding back progress in those areas because we don't offer the options for schooling, because we don't have the capacity in schools, because we limit out of area? So I think it's important for us to not only be reactive to what's going on in our communities, but to also be proactive in helping them to rebound, because that only helps our schools. So I appreciate you taking the time to go and meet with Peggy and talk about some of those economic development drivers that have come up in her discussions. But I think those are all things that this advisory committee can potentially bring to the table, is those multiple perspectives and multiple concerns. Is there a need for experience in the realm of facilities and capital? Absolutely. I think that's an important part of it. But I think sometimes we limit our perspective. And I think the more that we can open it up to the community to provide input, not that they're making the decisions, but certainly to evaluate and bring those multiple perspectives, I think we're going to be more successful. Done.
Good. Okay, I've got one, well, I'm going to speak about advisory committees, and it actually is going to roll us right into the next section, because it's the same comments I was going to make in that section. And while I agree with your comment about similar to the audit committee, let's clarify there is a slight difference with the audit committee, in that the audit committee has some autonomy in decision making relevant to their charge of audits, which our advisory committees don't really have that autonomy of decision making. They are an advisory group, but you're right, they have buy-in. They're vested in it. I have concerns about advisory committees. Although I see value in them, I think it's the way that we heed them and utilize them that is sometimes trips us up. When we get advice, I think it's important to know the qualifications of those bringing us advice. Those sitting before us right now have a lot of qualifications, and I value your input. Some of the advisory committees, as we know, are people that sometimes it's feel-good groups sometimes. Some of them have some qualifications, some of them don't have qualifications. And then they deliberate on a recommendation, and they bring forward a recommendation. That's great. It's nice to hear that recommendation and what their thoughts are. But I don't think that should circumvent your recommendations, because sometimes those recommendations differ from staff's recommendations, but we don't get staff's recommendation. There seems to be this belief that, oh, well, the advisory committee, then we're just going to go with that. Personally, I want to hear the advisory committee's recommendation, but I want to hear your recommendation too. If you disagree with what the advisory committee is bringing us, then tell us that. Because sometimes you just don't know the qualifications of the advice that you're getting, and too often it comes before this board, and then we make a decision and realize, well, something wasn't well thought out, and the board is responsible for that decision, and it may have not been the best decision. So I wanted to make a point that these are advisory, recommending bodies. They're not decision-making bodies. We value their input. I think the advisory groups are very important. As a matter of fact, I may even be suggesting another one depending on some conversation later tonight. But I want to clarify they are just recommending bodies. It's similar to a planning and zoning group, that they are front line of defense, vetting out something that maybe come before a county commission or a city council, but when it comes before them, that body, that commission or that council, they hear all the different options and then they get to make a decision. This board really gets to hear all the different options. So, and I see a lot of yeses from my peers. I think we would like to hear more of the options and not just one opinion.
And I'd like to say that, you know, a lot depends on what it looks like, what the committee makeup is. That's number one.
Exactly.
But also, I mean, if you want to talk about an advisory committee to come back to us to tell us that he went through a good process, that the process that they used was valid, that they liked the process, no matter what his decision is, I'm okay with that. But for them to come up with something when we are paying experts to
Advise
be the
us.
experts on, anyway, I just think that needs, for me, it just needs a little bit more thought. And maybe I just don't have enough detail on it. And so when that's provided to me, maybe I'll change my mind.
Mr. Ziegler?
Mrs. Nisi?
I hadn't thought about that till you mentioned different advisory committee, because you're right, because we have a decision tonight coming forward from an advisory committee, and in particular that one, it depends on the advisory committee. Like one tonight, I know several people voted because they voted against because they didn't like the presenter. It had nothing to do with the item coming forward. It's that they didn't personally like the presenter. Well, that's not a good reason to have an item not come before the board. So I would not want the same thing to happen with the capital project.
So we need more information.
Yeah, and so I'm sitting here thinking, if we're doing capital projects, we're talking millions of dollars. And so you have to be real careful with advisory. Yeah, that is scary. I hadn't even thought about that.
I guess if nothing more, just sending a message to all of you that we value your opinion, and if you disagree, don't feel like
you
you're
guys are the
tied
experts
to what that group says. I want to know what your thoughts are before we make a decision. And since we're rolling into the governance section, there are some references to central office. And we were talking about how things are described. I'm not sure that's the best description for defining as a central office. I think we know what we mean, but I think it's more like central services, or there's maybe a better name for it than central office, given direction.
Just in general.
Yeah, just in general, just saying
It's on
it came from the
G1.
central office. G1?
Under strategies,
Yeah,
central office communication protocol.
Yeah, I'm just not sure that's the best description for, central office is more of a geographical than it's the primary, I think, you know what I'm saying? I'm not sure what the answer is, I'm not sure what the words are, it just doesn't sound right.
And it goes right into review role of advisory councils, right?
And
like
that's all I have for governance. Anybody else have any input on governance? We're running short on time. We can run over, but.
No, actually, all I would say was, I thought that was, I wrote down that this is the key to everything else, specifically G1. And I think Dr. Mullins really hit the nail on the head with his description of that. Thank you.
Yeah,
We need it.
I'm good with that, because I don't have a whole lot of input on that one.
Do we need an advisory council committee to outline the responsibilities of the different advisory committees?
An advisory committee.
What did you say?
Would you head that up, Mr. Craig?
I can do that. Committee of one.
I think just clarification goes a long way. Okay, if there's no more input on governance, then Mrs. Nisi, we could start on finance.
Well, I had a great meeting with our new CFO. She has all the answers, and so I think that answers everything.
All right.
So, no, I think having a fresh set of eyes has been the best thing. As you can see, she is putting in some new processes, the way she's looking at things. We had a great meeting, herself, Joanne, and Dr. Mullins. I really didn't have a whole, I mean, we talked a lot, but we shared some great stories. You know, Mr. Ziegler, I think one of the best things she shared that was from Polk County that I think you ought to take under consideration, and maybe next year, who's ever chair, I won't be here, but one of the things she said that Polk County did that I think, do you mind if I share this?
No.
That I think I wish this board would do is that what their board did is at organizational meeting, each board member was assigned to a department. And that board member for that year was a part of that department as new things came about. You know how we've always talked about how we wanted to know more about what was going on, and so things like, would you explain a little bit, because I thought we've talked about for years that we feel like we're out of the loop sometimes. I know you're ready for lunch, Mrs.
I know where you're going with that the board members should be more involved.
But would you explain, because we talked a little bit about.
We had a board member liaison every year. A different board member was assigned to the division, and they worked directly with us on any initiatives outgoing. That way, what it helped with us is when we did bring something to the board, we had a board member who fully understood and could talk with our fellow board members about what the issues were we were dealing with, and had been, if not directly involved in the development of the initiative, they were very familiar with it from meeting with the leadership.
Similar to what I did with charter schools this year. I felt like instead of all of us always being called by charter schools, I asked to take on that role since I was already involved with the mediation. I took on the role as the charter school liaison so that, is it Dr. Archer now? Mrs. Archer and I have been in conversation, and they call me, and then when something comes up at the dais, I usually already know about it and can share so that she doesn't have to come running up all the time, and I'm kind of in the loop with that. And I just think it's a best practice.
I agree. Let's back up a category.
That actually goes back to governance.
That's right, just because let's back up a category, and let's add into governance, board member participation in various departments, and as we spoke before.
Aren't we doing that with our board champion?
Well, but it's a little more in depth what I believe they're speaking about, so let's clarify that. And also, we had spoken in the past about board members participating on more
but we didn't
committees.
We didn't really but we didn't have a way of really putting that in concrete. And I think this idea of a liaison, I really like, because we kind of did that. I know just Mrs. Archer and I did with charter schools, and it's really worked well. Just an example, this morning I got a phone call from one of the schools, and because she had already shared with me something that had come down, I was just able to be right on that and respond right back because I knew what was going on, and that was real helpful. And if we had that now with the way the departments are laid out, it keeps each of us in kind of a loop. And so
I agree with that. Liaison is probably the best description of what board members need to be to various areas, various committees, various departments, so that we can hopefully make some of your work easier and also champion things as they bubble up.
Be very helpful at my previous life, so that we had a board member that we could sit down and talk with and be involved in and get input. And I think our board members found that helpful because they were hearing it from someone other than just staff and a member of their own peers.
I like that.
Well, I'm also thinking it's a way to get know more about that department. And so if you rotate each year, then you get to know, I'm looking at the new organizational chart. If you rotate each year, especially as new board members come on board, it's really a way for them to get to know more about what happens in that department. And then next year, they get to know more about another department, because as we know, I know the public thinks all we do is meet twice a month, and you know, that's just a real push job. But it's really a way to really get to know that department and for you to get to know us more. So.
I'll make sure that.
That's a double-edged sword, by the way.
Close together.
Yep.
So.
Anybody else have any input on finance?
I
Mrs.
do.
Belford?
I just have one quick comment on finance, and I have actually already shared this with Penny, but since we are limited in having public discussion, I wanted to share it with my fellow board members as well. I have no doubt, given the fact that we go through 10,000 audits, that we are spending funds legally. My question is, are we spending funds the best way that we can to have the greatest impact that we can? Or are we spending funds, as Penny referenced earlier, paying debt out of impact fees frees up capital money? And if that is, in fact, the best way to do it, then that's great. But I question sometimes if we have alignment there, or if we have done it the same way for so long that we just continue doing it that way. There was an agenda item that came up a couple of months ago on I think it was a reading allocation, and we had always just requested that the state allow us to transfer that to the operating fund, or I'm probably getting the specifics wrong. But the point behind it is, I think we need to question why we're spending the dollars that we're spending, and if we are spending them from where they should be spent, or if we're just doing what we've always done. And so that was one of the things that I expressed to Penny as we move forward, just kind of keeping that top of mind, that I think all of us should be asking the why. Or is there a better way that we should do it? Not to create additional work, but to verify, as was stated earlier, that we're doing the best thing going forward. And so not necessarily a question of legality, but certainly a question of efficiency and effectiveness. And I think that needs to be top of mind.
I just want to touch on that briefly, because you're talking about something, a culture, it's kind of like a cultural change. I've heard that for years. We do it because that's the way we've always done it. I get tired of hearing that, and I'm hoping that when you see something that we've been doing because we've always do it, and you disagree, say something.
Like the email I sent yesterday?
Yes.
Yeah. Can I see?
Mrs. Henderson.
That's a good point, Mrs. Belford. But I think this kind of goes back to what I'm hoping this is going to lead to, which is better processes within each of our organizations. With better processes, as our employees have a voice to tell us how to do things better in their area, we should be ultimately doing things more efficiently. Without that voice from the people who are actually doing it, we may not know it. And three of us could be sitting next to each other actually doing the same thing, and we really don't know that, or in three different areas. So I'm hoping that as a part of all of this, when with this strategic plan, that a part of that is looking at the processes to ensure that we are doing the best we can, and including cost savings ideas from employees, because I think you're going to find something there. And you mentioned here about the cost-benefit analysis of all former budget cuts. While I agree with that concept, I would also assume that then there would be money to pay to bring it back. I mean, we may be doing things that are not, we did it for a reason. It may not be overall as beneficial as we want it. You know, are we underwater on it? Then of course let's fix it. But if we're still saving by it, unless we're going to be able to pay for it because we've got extra funds from the state or some other windfall, if you know, played the lottery.
If we don't have the money, we can't bring it back.
Okay. And I also mentioned improving the processes and working on reducing the debt payments. So, okay, that's it.
Anybody else on finance? Okay, communications, our last area. Since that's mine, I'll start with that. I wanted to comment. I like that. I think the board is clear, and I think we're all clear. We want communication from the bottom to the top, so that we all know what we can do better to serve those in the ranks. At the same time, I think it's very important that there's communication all the way down to the depths, so that too often we're doing things and nobody knows why we're doing them or what we're doing, and then there's misperceptions, and we need to stem off those misperceptions ahead of time, which was one of the things that Dr. Blackburn, you spoke about in your, even in your interview, is the importance of proactive, advanced communication. And that's also how we build advocacy, internally and externally, is through better communication. And I know we've all talked about that, and we're going to be doing that. I would also like to encourage regular communication from up top. As a matter of fact, board members, I'd like to know what you think about, because I've talked to employees and said, hey, would you like to hear from a board member every once in a while? Would you like to know what their thoughts are, what's going on? And I think it would be good if maybe once a month each of us had a communication to the employees, the things that we think are important that's going on, so they know what our thoughts are, they know about us, they know who we are, and the same from the superintendent, maybe even some other leadership positions, so that we're communicating in all directions from all people, not excessively, because you know what it's like to get too much communication, you start getting numb to it all. But I just think that it'd be opening up communications in all respects to all areas. Anybody else have anything on communication? Mr. Craig.
Just two quick things. I wrote down under in the part about constituent concerns. I just didn't see how the board member interaction was there. I didn't quite see. I understand that we get people who email and that, but there needs to be some sort of continuous feedback loop or interactive loop that or a central place where the board members can go and see that a situation has been handled, resolved, still in work, whatever. And I don't need specifics on it, but I just didn't see that mentioned there. The other thing I wrote down was in the proactive communications portion, absolutely everything you said right on, but it's almost like we need, for lack of a better term, a marketing campaign for us, right? And it's not a, the fact is that, we are in competition with others, and we do very well. We compete extremely well against the other educational opportunities in this county. And if you look at other counties, I think it's pretty easy to see that. But we want to maintain that, and I think we've done extremely well in providing opportunities and in success in our classrooms all the way through the entire gamut. But I want to make sure that as parents and students and as a community, as they reach a certain transition point or a decision point, that they have the information available to them to make that decision. And granted, we're not going to capture every single student. That's not the goal. But we want to make sure is that we have given every opportunity to a person who's ready to make that decision to have all the best information they have for what is available to them so that they can make that decision. And I know that's sometimes maybe marketing a government entity, but this is more the business side of it, because we truly are. And as Dr. Blackburn has said, every student that's out of the classroom that goes and chooses another one, that's money that we don't have, and we don't want to look at it as money, because but that really gets down to the chase of whether we can improve programs and build extra capacity and all that type of thing. So anyway, that's.
Can I respond real quickly?
Sure.
It is in the strategy, but that will be kind of fleshed out a little bit more in detail in the project plan, because I agree, especially when we have empty seats. I mean, whether or not we choose that we want to really expand the school district, or better yet, make it so efficient by filling empty seats through the appropriate campaign. I did that in my last school district, and that's certainly one of my key focuses for this year.
Cool, thanks.
Mrs. Nisi.
Dr. Blackburn, I'm confused about something here. What I don't understand is part of it's the staff organization plan and how it fits with this, because staff organization has customer service and those job descriptions falling under Michelle, but yet Dr. Mullins' job description has the internal communication plan and customer service under him, yet Michelle's the one that has those people under her. So I don't understand why that goal isn't under her and why it's under Dr. Mullins.
So I'll speak to it, and I'll have
Because it seems like to me, that goal ought to be under Michelle. I don't understand why Dr. Mullins, when he went through that whole communications goal and the strategies, I don't understand why he's doing that and why it's not under Michelle, because it seems like logically, since she has the staff and she evaluates those staff and it falls under her, I don't understand why he's the one implementing.
So I'll start, but then I'll definitely kick it over to Dr. Mullins. A big piece of his strategy is to make sure, and we may have to look at rebranding the central office description of us, but so right now I'll just say us, making sure that we are working for them, the people in the field, and we are organized effectively, communicating appropriately, et cetera, et cetera. That's a little different than the community relations aspect of it, but I'll have Dr. Mullins and Ms. Irwin speak more to it.
And in fact, Michelle and I have had quite a bit of conversation about that. How do our roles, how are they interdependent? How are they independent? And to echo Dr. Blackburn, G1, if you will, really focuses on internal communications within the organization and governing how do we commit. God bless you.
Thank you. Sorry.
That's all right.
Because it's all about customer service, and those staff report to her.
Well, the customer service is all of those operational employees, whether it's maintenance, whether it is finance, whether it's educational technology, they all provide a service to the schools, not just customer service or customer care as it's defined here at ESF, but it's creating a customer service-oriented culture, commitment across the entire organization, and recognizing that if I'm fixing a leaky sink, I'm not just a plumber. I am enhancing and building a learning environment that helps students be successful. That's what we're talking about when we talk about customer service. More internal customer service to our own employees and own internal customers. Customer care is more of that external stakeholder relationship to the organization and nurturing that relationship. So customer care is more the external stakeholder communication and relationship, and then the governance piece is more internal and customer service. But
Okay,
certainly,
so then help. So should those front people be reporting to you then?
I think what the confusion is the title of customer service, which is what this department right now up here is, versus having a culture of every employee who works here is serving the customer and having quality customer relations out there. And so,
because it seems to me if you're going in the direction of government and community relations, then that's separate than what's going on out here, then maybe this out here needs to fall under Dr. Mullins.
If we retitled the people out front as customer care, then when you talk about customer service, it's about creating a culture where every person here in the organization who is out there doing service, whether they're in Gino's shop and they're out there fixing, getting that customer service and seeing that school as their customer and giving them service, versus being the people up here who are processing calls that may come in, concerns, and routing them to the right place and facilitate some of that.
Right, which still leads me to believe that maybe we need to relook at who these front people report to.
Either that or better describing the services or branding of the services so that it's better understood where the responsibilities fall. Because you're right, otherwise it is confusing.
So I don't want to hold this over. I now have some real questions now about the staffing plan after us discussing this, because I guess I always saw you as everything communications. You know, I thought communications, your face comes up, and after sitting through this today, I don't see that now. And so now I'm having to rethink things.
Well, you brought it up yourself when you said there's communications throughout. And I think one of the great things about this whole process has been the interdependency that we have recognized among ourselves. And so when you go to that RACI chart, while again, Dane, I'll use Dane as an example, he has communications plan on there. He's accountable for the communications plan, but he's named me as a responsible party to make sure he gets a quality communications plan delivered. It's the same thing, but when we're talking about the operations and working through the schools to ensure, again, that they get, the focus is on the schools, not the focus being here. It's about creating a culture where everybody is customer-oriented versus maybe our own department-oriented. And the people out front are really going to be dealing with pretty much what they always have been, with some additional responsibilities and support. And that's those calls that come in and routing people. It's really quite different. I'm not sure if I'm not
I'm just saying
articulating it appropriately.
I just need to not think of you always when it comes to communications.
I think you were the person who made the point that we all are communicating on behalf of the district, and that is true. We head up the formal communications efforts, and so we will head up, again, the formal customer service efforts as far as that is going. I think what Dr. Mullins is discussing is the fact that he wants to create a culture in the operations side where everybody considers the people they serve as a customer.
Right, but I think I see your department going in a whole new direction now. It's going to be more community relations, is what I see here for the 6 themes. And I have to just change my thinking now. Where I thought it was strictly communications, it's now gone a new direction, which is community relations. And I have to think, I'm just processing things different.
I see what you're saying.
You see what I'm saying?
I do.
So, okay. I get it now.
We'll think about that. We'll think about that.
She's ready for lunch. Thank you.
All right, then we'll adjourn.
Thank you.